West Yorkshire Transport Committee, and you are very welcome to this building, which is newly refurbished. We're very glad to be back here. And of course we have new people around the table as well that we've not had on this committee before. So I think it would probably be helpful for us to do some introductions. So first of all, my name is Susan Hinchcliffe and I am leader of Bradford and chair of this committee. Who are you?
Hi. I'm using the same mic, sorry. Hi everyone, my name's Ian Part. I'm a Governance Service Officer for the Combined Authority.
Councillor Manisha Kaushik from Kirklees and the Deputy Chair of this committee.
Councillor Peter Carlill from Leeds, and I'm a Deputy Chair of the committee. I was last. Most people should know me. I was last on a year ago.
Councillor Taj Salam, Bradford, also engagement lead for Bradford.
Councillor Jane Scullion, Deputy Leader of Calderdale Council.
Councillor Isaac Wilson, Councillor in Wheatwood Ward in Leeds.
Councillor Eleanor Thompson, Leeds.
Councillor Colin Hutchinson from Calderdale.
Councillor Hassan Khan from Bradford.
Councillor Matthew McLaughlin from Colne Valley and Kirklees.
Councillor Peter Clark, Bradford City Council.
Councillor Neil Buckley, Leeds Council.
Andrew Fitzpatrick, Research and Spatial Intelligence Manager at the Combined Authority.
Hi, Craig Taylor, Head of Portfolio Management Appraisal at the Combined Authority.
Dave Pearson, Director of Transport and Property Services at the Combined Authority.
Liz Hunter, Interim Director of Policy and Development at the Combined Authority.
Lovely, thank you very much. And we've got apologies from Amir Hussain from Yemi Architects, who's on his way, but he's also going to have to leave a bit early because obviously we're clashing with Friday prayers, I'm afraid, today as well. Aren't we? We need to watch that from a timing point of view. And also Alex Rosshaw is on his way. And Councillor Martin Bolt. Is there any apologies for lateness or for the whole meeting?
For the whole meeting.
Right, okay, just apologies recorded from Councillor Bolt. Councillor Swift, you're indicating?
Yes, Chair. Also from Melanie Jones from Wakefield, who unfortunately wasn't actually notified of the meeting and she'd entered into other commitments.
Right, so that needs amending, doesn't it?
I do have just some further apologies.
All right, fine, yeah. Sorry.
So we also have apologies from Councillor Butt, Councillor Cunningham, Councillor de Gorn, Councillor Firth and Councillor Morley.
Lovely, thank you very much. And Melanie is on the list, so she should be getting a notification. So you'll just double check that.
Yeah, I'm sure she has been.
Lovely.
She is now, Chair.
Lovely, thank you very much. Super, well, let's get on with the agenda. So we've done apologies for absence. Any declarations of disclosure or pecuniary interest that have been identified so far? I can see no one indicate. Oh, Councillor Tashla.
Chair, I mean, we haven't been asked to actually fill in a new declaration of interest, but just to say, I mean, there was BSIP, I work in the industry.
Let it be known that Councillor Taj Salam works for First Bus. And just in case everybody didn't know that. Anybody else? Anything to declare? No? Lovely, thank you very much. Well, obviously that can be declared as we go through the meeting if you notice anything in amongst. So we do have some exempt information. Appendix 6 of agenda item 13, which is we've identified as contain exempt information. So if you do need to talk about that when we come to that item, can you please let me know, and then we'll have to obviously clear the public for that item. But otherwise, the public can stay in here. So if you can remind me when we get to item 13, that'd be really helpful. Councillor Rosshaw from Bradford, just arriving. And yes, Helen Hayden, you snuck in there without me seeing. So Councillor Hayden from Leeds Council also arriving. Oh, it's okay. Don't worry. Minutes of the meeting of the Transport Committee held on 27th of May. It doesn't seem very long ago. The copy is in the pack. Has anyone got any amends for those of you who are there? Because obviously we're a new committee now. Any amends or comments on that? No, in that case, well, I propose we have those as a correct record of that meeting. So that will be good. Can I just see all those in favour, please show? People were there, thank you. And then moving on then to the first substantive item on the agenda, which is governance arrangements. And as I said, I started by saying this is a newly formed committee, and there have been some changes to it in that two things. Firstly, we have two new deputy chairs, well, one new deputy chair and one recycled deputy chair, dare I say. Very, welcome to you both. There is lots of work to do. And, Peter, you're going to be working mainly on bus, and you're, Manisha, we're going to be working on rail, just to surprise you, then keep you on your toes. So there's lots of work to get on with. It's great that we're a devolved authority with a mayor now, because it means we do have big pieces of work to get through, and that's great for councillors, because we like to get stuff done and like to make improvements. So welcome to that. Also on this committee, we now have the portfolio holders for transport from the respective 5 authorities who also have voting members of this committee now. So linking it with the combined authority, with decisions at the district authority, trying to link it all together basically, so we're all joined up and all have sight of everything going through. So that's some of the rationale behind it. David, have you got anything to add on that?
No, thanks, Chair. Just a couple of a little sort of what happens next elements, really, in the sense that I think one of the key things is that's changed in the Transport Committee is how we do the district engagement element of this, and as the paper defines, and many of you in the room, each district has a district transport engagement lead, and the meetings which we used to have as district consultation subcommittees become a little bit more inclusive and informal, and plan to have a cycle of those in the autumn, and to have a session with the engagement leads to do a bit of planning around how we do this, because that's an element of this arrangement that's new, and it's probably worth us sitting down, and I think a date's been organised in August or late July to do that. So I think that's a next step there. I think the only other thing I would draw attention to is the terms of reference for the working groups that are on the paper as well, and that for those members who are not familiar with the Transport Committee, it's quite common to have sort of fairly ad hoc workshops on particular issues as well, where we can sort of work through some of the detail on some of this. Finally, the other sort of big difference in the Transport Committee is that this committee is now the committee that takes decisions on projects and spending. Our colleague Craig will talk you through that a little bit more further in the agenda in terms of the role of the committee and how it fits in with the assurance processes as well. But that does change the nature of the business in this committee a little bit, and it's why there are more Transport Committee meetings this year than there were in previous years. So we'll get to that on the agenda, but I just thought I'd flag that as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And the working groups that we've had before, obviously some members will be departed now, and we'll be recruiting new members to those panels?
Yes, I think so. I'm just trying to remember. So, some of them are open invitations to everybody, I think, as well, on the committee.
I think generally the more understanding we all have of all these streams of work, the better, because we have, particularly engagement leads, had quite a lot of explaining to do, obviously in the districts, to people who are interested but perhaps might not know the whole, the restrictions we're under and the opportunities that there are. So, Councillor Hutchinson, is it? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. I do have some concerns about the terms of reference, particularly the Decarbonisation and Emissions Working Group. I can see the benefit in flexibility, but that can be at a risk of drift. I would be my concern, and so there doesn't seem to be any clear reporting mechanism back to this committee from that working group. An issue that's of such fundamental importance to West Yorkshire and the workings of this committee, given the proportion of carbon emissions that are of transport origin, is there any scope for a standing item on the agenda on our progress towards meeting the carbon reduction targets that we know that we're going to have to meet, just to set the tone of the subsequent decision making that this committee is going through as much as anything?
So I'm much more in favour of doing things and talking about them. So we talk about stuff at this meeting when we need to progress things and get agreement, but we need to do quite a lot of stuff on this agenda. There's lots of talking about climate emergency, but not a lot for doing. So I'm in favour of doing. So Councillor Scullion, you wanted to come in?
Yes, Councillor Hutchinson has actually picked up a point that I'd seen in the papers, really. And I think standing items, possibly a good idea, but picking up the point that you made, Chair, about how important it is that the whole committee is on top of these issues, really. I would say active travel as well as the carbon reduction agenda. So if we can try and make sure that we have the natural organic occasions when we get together and talk about those things, as well as the formal report backs that would come through the reporting system. Thank you.
Yes, I mean, practically every meeting we talk about decarbonisation of transport anyway. It's on the agenda every meeting because obviously it's such an important thing. We've obviously got some schemes today, capital projects that also include some of that because obviously we need to get people out of the car onto active travel. So, and I am quite keen to get everybody involved in all those groups as much as we can and information. So I respect your opinion, Councillor Hutchinson, but we do need to drive this agenda on and we will talk about things at this meeting when there's stuff to do. I think it's really important. So with that proviso, let's remember that obviously Councillor Hutchinson's concerns and make sure that we do follow through and make sure that obviously transport decarbonisation is progressed as quickly as possible. So any other questions on that? Councillor Salam.
Just going back to the regular open forums, Dave. I mean, last time, I think it was about 4 years ago when we did the consultation with the local groups to say what was, best timing, best, place to actually meet. Now, we've always met in City Hall, but if you remember, we did it at 2 o'clock in the afternoon because that was the time that was identified as the most relevant to people that they could attend. Is there going to be that same process going over again? And when you talk about inclusivity, are we saying that we are actually now going to be extending that invitation out to all different groups that we can identify in the district?
I think on the second question from Councillor Salam, yes, I think that's the intention. I think what people used to find a little bit clunky with the previous arrangement is that we had these people called public representatives who were essentially around the table of the room, and it was a quasi-committee meeting, and it had minutes and it was recorded, whereas this approach allows for a little bit more flexibility around that, and so the invitation to participate can be more widely held. I think we did go around a little bit of a loop. I think if you remember on what's the right time, when's the best place, and where's the best place to have these meetings. To a certain extent, doing it this way also gives a little bit of flexibility. So if what works in Bradford is different to what works in Wakefield, then that's fine, because so long as it's meeting the overarching sort of requirement for having some level of public engagement and then coming back to this committee through yourselves, and I think that's one of the things that we probably need a little bit of discussion around in terms of how do you want to do it in your areas, but also what we think is the best way of doing it, because the timing of it is there's a good reason and a bad reason for all of the times you can choose, as we found. So and locations probably one was quite different for different in different council areas as well.
So I take Councillor Sland's point absolutely. That flexibility of time to meet in the evenings, for example. If we want to be inclusive, then we have to be able to flex those arrangements.
And I think obviously that's if the viewers are an evening meeting, then that's something we would fix up.
So perhaps is there remaining meetings in the diary for the engagement leads to meet with officers
I
and
think
discuss
there
that?
is. If there isn't, there is about to be. But I'm
Okay, well,
pretty
can we
sure
get that
something
together? I think that would be
Okay,
really helpful. Councillor Clark?
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to raise a point on Appendix 2 of the report, just regarding the various roles on the committee. It was something that I raised on the Transport Scrutiny Committee, and I feel that obviously I have the chance to raise it here, so I shall. Regarding to the Deputy Chairman post, it feels a little bit of job creation, while the Director of Transport assured us that the work of the Deputy Chairman were quite significant and varied. I think it's a little bit of job creation and creation for an SRA that's probably not necessarily needed. And the question really is, do we think this is the best use of resources?
Yes. So the previous deputy chair was on about £29,000 a year. These are now 12,000. No, was it 12? About 12,000. So actually, you get two here for less than the price of one that we had last time. They are both going to be working full time. Actually, I'm afraid on this, because there is huge amounts to do. We've got mass transit, we've got the bus stuff that we're coming along to next. We've got a lot of work to do on the failed government IRP, Integrated Rail Plan, which has left this region in a real issue when it comes to economic growth. The government have not put any investment into heavy rail in this area, which is a real problem for us. We're doing our own work, of course, and putting new rail stations in across West Yorkshire to do what we can, but we do need a government that believes in us, and we do need the political work to do, because actually what these guys will be doing, which you don't see, Councillor Clark, but you will do now, you're on this committee, I'm sure, is that they have to go around to each of the districts talking about the schemes and making sure everybody is agreed. Because we want a West Yorkshire mass transit programme, but actually we can't do mass transit just in Wakefield or just in Leeds or just in Bradford. Everybody has to agree to it, and therefore that takes a lot of conversation and a lot of negotiation, and that is what they're going to be doing. So I would like you not to denigrate the roles of the deputy chairs before they start, because honestly they have a lot of work to do. I have a lot of respect for them because they'll be doing all the legwork. Actually, I chair the committees, but they do the legwork. And I get no money for doing this, by the way, if that's what you're concerned about. I think I'd like your backing for them as they start a very difficult job in very significant times for us as a country. So I think that's very important that that's said. Councillor Scullion, did you want to come in? Thank you. Just one thing I would say is that the Mayor's Big Bus Chat is on starting the 11th of July, isn't it? Which is a great idea, going back to engagement and inclusivity. Can we make sure that the district engagement leads are invited to those? It goes over about, is it 6 weeks, I think?
Yes. We share the programme and obviously discuss with the engagement leads how they sort of plug into that.
Thank you very much. So with that, I think it's a report there. Just have a quick look. Yes, recommendations. So any other questions? No, we're okay. Can I just see all those in favour, please show? Thank you very much. It is carried. So moving on now then to the BSIP item, which has been occupying a lot of our time, a lot of your time in particular, hasn't it, Dave Pearson?
And others, yes, in the organisation and other members as well. For those who were on the committee before, you're probably familiar with where we got to. So, but I'll sort of start from the beginning on this, if I may, because that's useful context to what is essentially an update report here. The bus service improvement plan is something that is all local transport authorities were required to do last year following the publication of the government's national bus strategy. And so each area needs to sort of set out its plan to improve bus services. And we're required to submit that plan to government at the end of October of last year. And alongside that plan was the requirement to submit some costed areas where we want to improve bus services. And so that's we and all the other local transport authorities submitted that to government, and we heard in April of this year that this region had was successful in being awarded, indicatively awarded, just short of £70 million over 3 years of revenue funding. And this sits alongside the City Region Transport Settlement, which is capital funding, which will also complement the plan to improve bus services that was set up. So the government set out a number of steps for us to meet. One of the requirements of this is that the deployment of this funding and the management of bus services is done under something called an enhanced partnership, and that's a particular provision under the Bus Services Act, which in a nutshell involves a sort of co-management of the bus network between the commercial bus operators and the local transport authority and the district council highway teams, and there's quite a lot of sort of statutory provisions that sit around the enhanced partnership, and so we established an enhanced partnership earlier in the year, back in April, again in terms of one of the steps along the way to get hold of the bus service improvement plan was to do this. We have a long-standing bus alliance, and from what Councillor said earlier, I think that's probably something that Councillor Carlyle will chair going forward, and Councillor Groves did before then, and that's a sort of where we and the bus operators and the councils sort of meet together to basically oversee all aspects of the bus services, but particularly with the sort of delivery of a bus service improvement plan. So we've got the sort of partnership structure in place. We've got an indicative funding allowance for this bus service improvement plan. Yesterday we were required to go back to government with sort of firmed up costed proposals and a draft enhanced partnership scheme that we would adopt, which essentially is the management plan for the bus service improvement plan, which would be jointly delivered between the combined authority and bus operators. So this report's really just bringing you up to speed with the next steps of doing that. To establish an enhanced partnership scheme, and we've got an enhanced partnership plan which sort of covers how and the governance and how we would do it. The enhanced partnership scheme is a sort of contractualising the various different parties' contributions towards this. Two big things to think about in terms of the bus service improvement plan money and how it will be spent. Around about half of it has been earmarked for initiative to actually reduce bus fares across West Yorkshire, and that essentially would involve the combined authority administering a scheme where this money is then sort of paid over to bus operators to compensate them for having reduced their fares, and that's a sort of short-term process over the 3 years, with the aim of increasing bus patronage and making that pay for itself over the longer term. So there's that's one element of it. Another element of it is how we might improve the actual service provision, and in particular to improve the level of service for particularly for communities who have a poorer level of bus service now, and so a large amount of the bus service improvement plan funding is set aside for that purpose as well. So the next step with the bus service improvement plan and the enhanced partnership is that we've submitted the requirements to the DFT in terms of the spend profile, the enhanced partnership which will manage that spend, and then we hope to hear from the Department for Transport hopefully over the summer sometime, that's all successful and we get the green lights to be able to draw down on the money. But to be able to have an enhanced partnership scheme that covers it, we've got to go to the next stage of the process. And so the combined authority meeting later in July, I'll be recommended to make the enhanced partnership scheme. We then have a process of statutory advertising. Bus operators have an opportunity to object should they choose to do so, and there's provisions in the Act for how that's been managed. So, but we have actually engaged with bus operators to get to this particular point in terms of what the enhanced partnership scheme looks like. So quite a lot of process in this to step us towards essentially getting the funding to be able to move forward on bus services. So this report basically sets that out. So apologies, I've sort of laboured that one, but I just thought it was useful, Chair, to sort of start at the beginning of it.
No, that's very helpful. I mean, obviously, enhanced partnership is the first step for us to get more control and more equal partnership with our bus operators who are up for this and obviously want to work well with us to improve the service for residents. I'm very pleased about that. BSIP is an opportunity, although of course the money's come down over time, hasn't it? It was going to be a big ambitious programme to go on top of what we'd already got, but now of course the bus service recovery grant is going on.
Yes, and the next item I'll address that a little bit in terms of that. I think the other thing is about the bus service improvement plan money is and probably applies across the piece as well, is that the funding is what's been announced, but the impact of inflation is having an effect on all these things. So in terms of how much it buys, it's a little bit less than perhaps it was when we put the bid in. But and government are not inclined to inflate it. So that's another point as well.
However, of course, we're pleased to have some outreach. Other authorities have not been successful, so well done on getting the money in the first place. It's hard fought for, but will be very well used. So questions, comments? Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Chair. And I think you've just referred to it yourself, actually. The support that finishes now at the end of October, which I think is more or less being confirmed. So it will no doubt come up in the next item or whatever, but presumably this, in a way, you've got the £70 million, but then that will be netted off by the loss of the support which is going, won't it? Is that right?
It's quite important, I think, that the way in which we've presented it so far, and what I would say to the next item, but I'll say to this is, it's important to try and keep the bus service improvement plan money for improvements, but we are going to have to deal with the consequences of the loss of funding. So I don't think it's our position to government, and the Mayor has written to the Secretary of State this week asking for a bit more of a transitional period for that funding. For the specific reason is it would be really sort of counterproductive to basically use the money to plug the gap in the way you just said, because actually that won't improve bus services. And so I think there is a bit of a challenge here, because the end of the COVID-related funding and the start of the improvement process, and there's a little bit of a gap between the two, and that's going to be one of the challenges we have.
And Councillor Booker, you're right, we're going to come on to that sustainability review, which is linked to the bus service recovery grant cut that the government are doing. And I think we are going to have 5 minutes after the meeting, aren't we, to brief members privately on some of this stuff as well. Yes, so you must tell us, Dave, when we're straying into areas that you can tell us about later. But just beware, people know. Oh, Amir's popped up. I never even saw you come through the room. I don't know how you managed that all of a sudden. Amir Hussain.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Chair, and apologies for being late.
You are Amir as well, because obviously.
Yeah, sure. My name's Amir Hussain. I'm a elect board member and also the Deputy Chair for the Place Regeneration Housing Committee, and I also run a technology data company and an architecture practice, both based in Bradford. So thank you. I am new to this, and this is an area that's new to me, and so forgive me if this is kind of straying off topic. And I recognise from the papers that an awful lot of work has gone into where we are. I did wonder, just on this sort of review that's taking place now, whether there was almost too much focus on the actual transport, dare I say it, and actually to sort of really understand what is causing people to move, what is causing people to travel. And I think that there's some really major changes that are taking place within communities, and the way that hybrid working is evolving, the way that people are trying to seek more fulfillment from within their communities. There's a whole thing around sort of localizing people's 15-minute neighborhoods where if, for example, people are able to work much more from home, are able to get the things that they need in terms of school and groceries and hobbies and so on from within those localized areas, then what are the things that are actually causing them to travel beyond that? I recognise that a lot of data's been gathered, and the thing about data, and it's an area that I know well, is that it's obviously historic, and the circumstances we're in now are very different. And I guess I wondered whether we've actually sort of got futurists, I think, involved in this analysis, and whether we've really got an understanding of who's doing what where within communities. And I think there's ways of mapping and understanding that geospatially to understand where are the places that are sustainable in terms of people being able to achieve that level of fulfillment and being able to achieve everything they need and actually don't need buses. They don't, or their need of buses is much more limited than maybe it is where those things don't exist and where people actually have to travel much further. So I just wondered whether there was something, and it might be just blue sky thinking at this stage, given everything that's happened, and forgive me if this is not relevant at all, but I thought I'd just raise it because it's an area that I'm particularly interested in.
So that's an existential question, I think, Councillor saying really. But I think the question really is about the network. As we're coming onto that paper, not quite on that paper yet, really, but you know, with the work that we're doing about what an ideal bus network might look like, you know, how much are we cited on those changes in the future, like the 2070 commission that Bob Kerslake is running, etc.
I'll start now, whether Liz wants to come in as well on that. I mean, I think they're all really strong points. I mean, to a certain extent, we're embarked in this particular area about how, really in the process of how do you modernise the bus service to meet the different travel demands, and to a certain extent, underlying a lot of the sort of financial issues that are present in this piece is the fact that travel behaviours changing, and also that we're not quite sure where travel behaviours levelling out at as well, and so I think one of the things, as Councillor Hinchcliffe just said, is that we need to look at how the bus network evolves. There's still an awful lot of people who use buses. It still has a role to play. What its role might be in the future might be quite different to what its role was in the past. And I think I'll be the first to admit, and I'm sure anybody else in the room who's worked with the bus industry over the years has said the bus industry hasn't, the bus service hasn't evolved particularly adaptly over the time. So there's a bit of an opportunity in that, as well as some short-term strain. So to a certain extent, this is very bus focused, but this is a bit of a process of how do you actually evolve the bus service to meet what current and future needs are going to be. And I think just to finish on it, what I mean by that the bus service hasn't moved adeptly is that it's a product for bringing people into big towns and cities. And if less of that is needed and more of something else, then that's the sort of thing we've got to start looking at in the longer term.
But essentially, we have to get people out of their cars and onto public transport because it's unsustainable as we are now. So the fact that between Leeds and Bradford, 74% of people travel between those cities in their car is not helpful. So make the buses better and easier to use, and then we'll get people onto buses. Councillor Swift.
Yes, Chair. It's a question about the financial aspects of the BSIP, but just in passing, reference something Dave's just been saying, we have had a very acute object lesson in Wakefield in the last few weeks about just how important the buses are, including one or two aspects that we didn't think they were quite as important. But my question related to the part of what Dave was saying about using roughly 50% of the BSIP money, the 70 million, to compensate operators for reducing fares. Now, I think my question, and this may be something for the 5 minutes afterwards, my question is, how do we determine what the fare should be to set against the figure of what the deficit is that we're compensating the operators for? Because on the face of it, it looks like too easy an option for the operators to say, oh, we think this £2 maximum fare is really nice, Mayor Brabin, but then to kind of present perhaps a rather exaggerated bill for what they count as the deficit. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Dave?
Yes, I think Councillor Swift sort of highlights what actually one of the probably the more complex piece of work that we need to do next, which is to establish what we'll term a sort of reimbursement scheme as to how we would calculate what bus operators should be paid. Now we do this already. We do this with the free bus pass scheme, and there's fairly complicated methodology that government prescribes for that. But in that methodology, there's lots of variables to work it. And one of the variables is to what extent does the cheaper fare actually generate more travel? So you don't want to be compensating the bus operator because the scheme has created more journeys, but you do want to compensate them for what in a sort of alternative world they would have got if they were charging full fare. Councillor Swift's other point, which is a good one in terms of whatever we do, the starting point will be what the fare is now, and what the fare goes to, and how that sort of gaps created. That sort of probably leads into another economic argument that's probably beyond my capability in terms of was there the right price in the first place, but essentially what will happen here is that a set of fares as to how they are now will be set, and then the gap will be measured in terms of how many people have travelled at lower fare. And that's the sort of equations that we need to write into a legal document and agree that with bus operators over the coming months.
Thank you very much. Any more questions? Councillor Slam.
I mean, just to say, Dave, I mean, one of the things that it is actually saying there to simplify the fares, and I think a lot of the operators actually took that study and that exercise. And just to say, I mean, in West Yorkshire, we've got the tap on, tap off now. I think where the complications might actually arise is where if it's cash transactions, if you've got a card transaction, and if I'm travelling for 3 journeys, I know that I'm going to get charged the least of the fare, or calculate the cheapest fare, which is £4.50. That's been advertised. I mean, we've got 140, 240 and 290. 290 from Bradford to Leeds is 290. Are you saying then that the starting point would be 290 if somebody's travelling from Bradford to Leeds, and then that's how the economics would work? Because cash transaction is the ones that may be above our capability, because we've got to work out a system. How do we do that? If I'm using my card for 3 journeys, I know the West Yorkshire Combined Authority could turn around and say, well, we're only going to pay 50 pence for that, because they would have paid £2 for 2 journeys. And then the 3rd journey is just calculated at 50 pence. It's the cash transactions that I'm worried about.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're confident that we'll get the data to capture the cash transactions from the ticket machines and that sort of thing. I think the knotty question here, to use that example of the 290, is, well, is the compensation 90 pence, or is it something slightly less than 90 pence? Because some of those journeys, as I say, people might have made because it's cheaper, and so we've got a sort of, which is what same as we do in the concessionary fare scheme as well. We sort of put some formula around how we would do that. I think the other point that Councillor Slam makes is first have a tap on, tap off scheme, but it's exclusive to that company. One of the other things in the bus service improvement plan and the City Region Sustainable Transport Fund is to put some of the back office technology in place, so that that tap on, tap off can apply on any bus journey. And one of the this is a step, a fairly significant step towards all bus fares being equal in terms of what people can expect to pay, and how they pay it, so that we don't have different companies with different ticketing arrangements and different products, and you can use this ticket on this bus or not on that bus. And this is a very significant step in the direction of achieving that. And I think it's quite important that we sort of make that step. It doesn't fully deal with it, and there are issues of competition law that needs to be fitted around. Whatever we do, it needs to fit with competition law as well. So there are complications in this particular aspect of things.
Why I say that, Dave, is that I think you all know that we've won the City of Culture 2025, and we're looking at about 2 million people coming into Bradford. So we want to make the fares as cheap and as simple as possible for people to actually travel around Bradford. I thought I'd get that one in.
Somebody just mentioned that Bradford's going to be City of Culture in 2025. I'm not sure if anybody knew that, but thank you.
I think we're sort of probably ready to go into the next item as well, because we've started to have that conversation.
Anything else from anybody before we move on to that? Because obviously we already started. Peter, Councillor Carlyle.
I was just going to reinforce that point that Dave was making about the simplicity of the fares, because the Mayor's bus chat will come with some more information, but one of the things we heard clearly, I was engagement lead in Leeds a couple of years ago, one of the things we heard clearly from the young people, the people who were trying not to buy a car in the first place and to be that new generation that just use the bus, was that simple fares was their problem. And knowing that any journey you take will be £2 will be incredibly important to young people taking a bus for the first time, because we heard very clearly from people that nervousness of turning up in front of a bus driver and needing to ask how much the fare was to a particular location that you hadn't visited before is one of the key barriers people see. So really, as well as that cost impact to this, there is that impact of you knowing certainly how much that'll cost you on the bus. Sometimes it may be that not having to talk to somebody and ask to go a particular place is that real importance with the tap on, tap off as well. So that's a real value in terms of getting people to come on the bus, use the bus more, go to all kinds of places that they've not been to before. And I think that can't be understated in how important that'll probably be going forward, especially for younger people.
And the whole point of this, isn't it, trying to increase patronage actually. So when this money is short-term money, it runs out after three years, and there's no guarantee from government there'll be any more, of course. So we need to increase patronage in the meantime to make sure that our buses are more viable going forward and keep those services going. So absolutely a good point, well made. Anything else before we move on to the next item? No? Lovely. So all we've got on here then is just recommendations about endorsing the approach to develop the bus network delivery plan, and noting the sustainability review, I think. No, sorry, wrong one. Is endorsing recommendation about the enhanced partnership scheme and notes the update on the bus service improvement plan. Just keep you on your toes. All those in favour, please show. Thank you very much, that is carried. So moving on now to the bus network sustainability review, which we've already alluded to, of course, and without this, I'd be really excited about the BSIP because I want to see more frequent buses and more opportunity to increase patronage, as Councillor Carlyle was just talking about. But this is a bit of a downer, isn't it? Because this is government taking away the bus service recovery grant in October, and I know you said the Mayor's just written in to say kind of extension to that, but I've been on ministerial calls where Baroness Veer from government has said quite clearly no more money, which is unhelpful given we're not back yet at the levels we had pre-pandemic.
Yes, and this is the other sort of negative side to the coin, as Councillor Hinckley has said. Basically, across the pandemic, the levels of bus use fell for obvious reasons, and I think, as has been said before, for reasons of changed travel behaviour, particularly the use of buses hasn't come back to the level, and therefore the revenue funding hasn't come back. All through the pandemic, bus services were funded by a combination of two things. One, a central government grant, which was paid direct to bus operators, but also to local transport authorities such as ourselves to compensate for some of that loss of income. And the other side of it is local government through ourselves in the combined authority kept paying the bus operators for the free bus pass scheme based upon the numbers of passengers which we were seeing in that month before the pandemic, rather than the actual numbers. government have gave notice back in March that the next set of funding under that basis from government would be the last one, and that runs through until the end of October. And they made it a condition of the bus grant, both to local government and to the bus operators, that there'd be a sort of joint review of the financial sustainability of bus services coming out of that in October. What this report's doing is giving you the sort of high level outcome of some work which we commissioned by looking at in using the government's required model in terms of identifying what services were viable, marginal, or non-viable, and we sort of followed that methodology, spent some time with the bus operators, got lots of data from in terms of ticketing and use, also looking at other aspects and attributes of the bus service as well. So we've got a sort of clearer picture of what may be the outcome when the funding comes to an end. And this report sort of giving you the high level that basically says, measured by mileage, we're sort of seeing just over 10% of the bus network is falling into that not viable sort of category. The next stage of this is obviously it's for the bus operators to decide what they do next. This is a business decision for them because they're commercial businesses, and we are in the process of discussing, okay, so what are your intentions in this regard? I think as Councillor Buckley asked earlier, it is quite odd that we're downstream. We've got some funding coming that is seeking to improve bus services, but we are in that sort of position where there could be an adjustment in October. What we are saying to bus operators is, this is a transitional period. We still aren't absolutely sure how things are going to level out in terms of bus demand. It has picked up a little bit in the months probably since March and April, but it's still not there in terms of the sort of levels of passengers we were seeing in 2019. So there is a gap, but we have been saying to bus operators, you need to see through this difficult time because we've got a proposition going forward which reduces fares, as Councillor Carlin said, potentially makes the bus more attractive to other people to use. So there's a level of nerve holding, and I think that's what the Mayor's statement last week was asking bus operators to hold their nerve. But there is a chance, and we have seen it in some other areas where bus operators will seek to reduce their services. We have seen it in this region of the last 12 months, particularly in Wakefield and Kirklees, where we've already had to step in to maintain some services that are either give notice to withdraw. There's even in the next couple of weeks, there are some sort of smaller scale service changes that are taking us backwards slightly. We also are very mindful of the fact that all the bus operators have stepped back some of their service frequencies on some of their routes because of the overriding driver shortage that is another factor in all of this as well. And members of the committee who were on before will know that we've talked about the impact of driver shortages and some work the Combined Authority is doing to support bus companies in recruitment and training as well. So it's quite a complex, difficult environment I guess buses are, like lots of other public services and businesses, are going through quite a period of adjustment with all the financial pressures. So what this report's saying is just putting you're aware that the review that's been done is identifying that there's a risk to some services. What this report's also doing is saying, well, we through the bus service improvement plan process, we intend to come back to this committee in November with a very definite plan in terms of how the bus network needs to be to meet our future needs and to meet the travel needs of the future, and what the sort of gap between what it is now and what it should be, and how we actually use the bus service improvement plan to address that gap. It's just that we could be seeing a bigger gap in the shorter term, so just to make members aware of that.
Thank you. So obviously some of the numbers in here are upsetting, really, given what we've just been talking about and improving services. So 11% of the bus network and 62 routes, you know, we want to be growing services, obviously not reducing them. Councillor Hutchinson.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just clarify the criteria that will be used to prioritise which services will be cut? Is it purely on commercial grounds raised by the bus operators, or are there other factors that will be brought into the decisions as to which routes will be cut?
Before you answer that, can I just say we have to be careful about what we discuss as well, because obviously operators can watch this, and this will be in a negotiation at some point. So if I just reiterate what I said before, if you need to hold anything back for the private session, please do.
Yes, to answer Councillor Hutchinson's question, really, the sort of two bits of that process, really. The bus operators are businesses, are commercial businesses. They will make those choices based upon commercial viability. What we do encourage them not to do, and some bus operators do in different ways, is not to take a route by route basis, because really they've got to look holistically at the network rather than necessarily sort of cherry pick. The second stage of that is that if a bus operator does then declare that they don't want to run a bus service anymore, then there's a legal process that they have to go through to do that, and that's basically to submit papers to the Traffic Commissioner 2 months before to say they're not going to run that service anymore. The Transport Committee, and it might be worth as part of the sort of briefing new members, has established criteria under which the combined authority would pay for services, and we already pay for services now, and it's a very significant amount of the bus network is funded through this committee, and through contracts with operators to deliver them. So the choice as to whether or not the combined authority pays for that service, there is a set of criteria to adopt. One of the things we propose to do is to come back to you with a revised set of that criteria, because I think the last time it came to this committee was 2016, so it's probably overdue looking at. And that criteria looks at value for money from a public service point of view. So it looks at it will look at how many people are travelling and how much it costs, and a sort of cost per head sort of basis, but also what social value of that route is, what accessibility issues, and what types of journeys it's supporting, and things like that.
Thank you.
Councillor Buckley.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. On this specific subject, really, at I think 2.7 on page 38, it explicitly mentions 62 services. And is that simply because that's 11% of the number of services which exist? Or if it isn't, presumably the bus operators have already identified the 62 over which the axe hovers. And I know we're all the same in all our wars. I've got the 7S, which seems to be the worst service in England as far as complaints are concerned. Buses not arriving 5 minutes, 3 minutes, and then they disappear into a different world. But is it possible, and I'm not being cynical here, But is it possible that some operators would say, well, actually, we've already identified that we really don't want to run that route, not necessarily that route, but a given route, and we're really not going to make any effort to improve it, and so that will self-identify as below the line.
Either that Machiavellian.
I'll answer the first part of the question first. The 62 is the total number of bus services routes that are affected by this. Some might actually only lose some early morning or evening or Sunday journeys within that services. So this has been this does tend to look at it on a journey level basis. So some of those 62s will be just services that have some shrinkage to the or some reduction in frequency or that sort of thing. There will be in that list, there are in that sort of list, services where the entire route is at risk. So, but careful not to say there aren't 62 whole services at risk here, but there's an element of it, and we are working through the detail with bus operators in terms of that. More to answer the second question, yeah, I mean, obviously they're going to take a little bit of a tactical view in terms of what works for them, what doesn't work for them, and sort of possibly sort of make their decisions based upon that. And in a way, that the next move is for them to decide what they intend to use, but intend to do. But part of this is some of the teams that work in my area being quite close to the bus operators, so we understand the thinking and the sort of strategy behind it, so that from their point of view, so that we can probably intervene better in terms of how we can sort of mitigate the impact of that. So yeah, it is a little bit of a sort of complex process.
I think it's safe to assume that 11%, we're all going to be affected somehow, aren't we? It's quite a big number. Councillor Carlisle and then Councillor Slough.
Thanks, Chair. I think the real disappointment I find in this is that those routes that may not be financially viable after this cut is taken out are the ones where arguably there's the greatest opportunity. I mean, if I think about my ward, just because it's the area I know most, I've got the number 72 that goes through mine, and taking your comments, yeah, a lot more people could travel between Leeds and Bradford on a bus, but there's never a time that you don't get on the 72 and it's packed with people. But then the other side of my ward, I've got a corridor that has trouble attracting patronage, shall we say, and we've had many discussions about it in the past. But the different routes that people are looking at and the different bus companies take those in very different ideals. And who would have known, for instance, that the 36 bus from Harrogate would be the one that increases patronage year on year as it did pre-pandemic? Who'd have thought that opportunity to create a route that was different than what maybe a route that works on a different bus would work? But that real disappointment is some of these buses that may be cut by operators because of this could be the ones where we had the biggest opportunity to increase that, get customers that had never used the bus before on that bus. And that's what we're really struggling. I think that's where that point about holding the nerve really comes in, because we are there trying to get more people on the bus and doing everything we can by making the services more reliable, helping with the ticket costs, etc. But if suddenly a route's gone, then there's nothing we can do in order to help. But we do want to be in that partnership with operators and go forward, build up that patronage so that the entire service and beyond, as you were saying, Dave, is viable. But every bus that disappears is one that it's even more difficult to bring back as people in that community start switching to cars and other methods of transport.
Yes, it's in everybody's best interest to increase patronage, isn't it? And cutting services doesn't deliver you that. So hopefully that's one thing we can unify around when we're going to these negotiations. Councillor Slough.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, I don't want to prolong the debate, but I mean, a couple of things that we've got to actually, bear in mind is that over the last 2 years, the efficiency agreements that have actually been going around, between, in the operating companies, where they have actually looked at efficiency agreements and also scaled back their operations where from 10 minutes to 15 minutes, from 15 minutes to 20 minutes. So there is already a reduction in PVRs, and those registrations have actually been done. There's also now overground reviews that are going on in all operators because they want to see what is commercially viable. The issue that you talked about, driver shortage. Driver shortage, there are many aspects why there is a driver shortage, is because people have left due to the conditions that they've been working under, due to the long hours, due to the unsociable hours, due to the lack of pay, and they've gone to actually get other jobs that pay more and are more suited to their lifestyle. The fear that I have is that this could actually get us on a skeleton service off-peak, or mostly just peak services are running and off-peak services are actually then scaled back to such that it's just a skeleton service. You've got a real danger of actually late buses not being run because there is no patronage on there or people are not travelling on there. But then we've also got to look at the main corridors. The 72 is a 10-minute service from Bradford to Leeds, but it runs in a straight line. It doesn't deviate anywhere to go into a housing estate, to go to medical centres or shopping centres. So on Manchester Road in Bradford, you've got a bus every 5 minutes. But those buses that are coming from Halifax, from Huddersfield, from Wyke, from Scholes, they're all running down one straight line. They don't deviate to go into the places. But you've got the Halifax service going to Halifax and coming back. First thing in the morning, you are going into Woodside Estate, where there's a large housing estate. But as soon as after 8 o'clock, they just run in a straight line. So those people are left stranded. So my real concern is that, when we are actually looking at this review, that we don't get it to a point where we are driving people away from the bus services at off-peak times. And those are the people that we need to get onto the buses. You've got the 72 running really efficiently at this moment in time. It's packed out. X6 service, we had to put more time into that because we were finding that we were not running on time. But these services that run on a straight line, maybe those are the only commercially viable services. Unless we look at how we connect the communities from different ways, we're going to be sat here 10 years from now and still talking about, what is commercially viable and what is not commercially viable.
So this goes to the heart of the issue, Councillor Salam, in that the government believes that you can make public transport commercially profitable, and they don't see it as a public good to support economic growth. And until we start seeing transport in a different way, the only really efficient means of transport is going from A to B without stopping, and that doesn't service most people and most economies, does it? And that is the problem you're identifying there. Councillor Swift and then Councillor Thompson.
Yes, Chair. As Dave mentioned earlier, there's been a lot of cuts over the last 12 months, and they've been particularly high in the Wakefield-Kirklees area. Now, overwhelmingly, those particular cuts, whether they were complete cuts or more typically heavy cuts to the frequency, were described as temporary. Okay, a lot of cynicism about that, but nonetheless, they were almost all described as temporary. Did those services go into the sustainability review as at their full level, or were they treated as already having gone?
They were looked at the full level.
Thank you, Chair.
Because I think there's some risks if it was the other way around.
Thank you, Chair. Part of our full network. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. So representing an area that has some long distance bus services from Leeds, which have suffered 33% cuts, some of them before the pandemic, and numerous short notice cancellations or disappearing off the system. We've got people who just can't rely on the buses, so they're walking a mile or two to get to the station, and it's just impossible. They don't trust the service, essentially. They don't know if they can get back from college. They might be stuck at Leeds bus station for an hour, 2 hours in an afternoon. So to then try and persuade people to use the buses is really difficult. One of our services stays within Leeds. One pops briefly into Bradford and then back out into Leeds again, just because we're the sticky out bit. But it's just really frustrating as somebody who runs a bus users group, trying to encourage people to use them when they're seeing that, running out of words, but just incredible frustration that they want to use the buses, especially in places where there is no alternative, but they just can't rely on them, and now they're afraid that they'll be cut further. Thank you.
And this is the thing, isn't it? I mean, we like to think the pandemic is over, but it's not. The impacts of it is still being felt. It's that long tail of impact on our economy and our way of life that will take years actually for us to come out of. And therefore, making changes now, a new network, is a difficult time to do it, because actually we're still in flux, I do feel, as a society, really. So, anything else, Emir saying?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I'm sort of, as I say, catching up with all of this, and it does feel like there's a really endemic problem in terms of getting money out of the government. And having had some conversations with ministers and people in the Department of Transport, the impression I've got from them is it is what it is, and you've got to find other ways and more creative ways of doing it. So if it turns out that there isn't any more money coming and there isn't any more money available, I was really asking about what our plan B option is. And I do think that companies like Amazon and Tesla even have done some really interesting things in how they've overcome a lot of these challenges, and how essentially they've approached the problem from a really different way. And I won't go into any details now, but I do think that in terms of that plan B consideration, if there is no more money and we are facing these cuts, do we simply just go down the route of, well, tough, that's what it is, and there's, or do we really start to look at them? And I think there are some technological solutions that could be employed, and I think that there are some other localized situations that could be employed in a similar way that I think Amazon has done very well with their last mile logistics and so on. And I just wondered whether we should be considering some of those broader things as part of sort of the, as I say, plan B.
And you'll see from other papers, not just in this meeting, but we are looking at that last mile. That is a really important element, as Councillor Salam was saying earlier. And how do you get to that main road where there's really frequent services is a big conundrum. And in Leeds, you've had the DRT, the Dependent Responsive Transport Pilot, which I think is well liked, but is hugely expensive compared to your normal bus service. That actually is more expensive rather than less expensive. So I think that's something perhaps we can go into in a future meeting about, you know, how do we do that last mile? I think that's probably a question that you're asking there, which I think we would all enjoy having a bit of a debate about and see if we can move forward on that. Any more questions on this matter? Okay, I mean, obviously the recommendations talk about endorsing the approach to a developer bus network development plan, and in spite of the negative thing, obviously it's a positive thing to come up with a network plan, I have to say, because, you know, buses are cobbled together over time, networks are cobbled together over time, and really start with a blank sheet of paper, this is how our economy works, this is where the big employment sites are, is a useful thing to do anyway. And I think you just have make sure you're doing that work in your own districts, as well as feeding into combined authority network review. So that's one of the recommendations. And also the position with the bus network sustainability review, we have to do this. So the Department of Transport are insisting this sustainability review has to go in, which, you know, it's a bit of a misnomer, isn't it? Sustainability review, it's a euphemism if ever I heard one. Where would you cut if we're not going to give you the money from government is the real title of that. So can I ask, see all those in favour, please show. Thank you very much, that is carried. Now then, moving on then to the next item on the agenda is sign off of the State of the Region Transport Theme Indicators, and this is Andrew Fitzpatrick. Andrew, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is really just an item to make committee members aware that later this year we'll be publishing the second iteration of the State of the Region report. So the State of the Region report was published last September, October time, and effectively it's a strategic stocktake against a range of socioeconomic and environmental indicators to help measure our performance against what was the strategic economic framework, but this time round will be measured against or themed around our corporate priorities. So just firstly to make you aware of that. Secondly, included in that document is a list of the indicators which we have proposed for the transport-related theme. Third thing I should mention is that it's worth referencing the government's Levelling Up white paper, where they've set out a list of also 40 indicators, and where possible we'll be aligning the indicators in State of the Region with the Levelling Up white paper where data is available. And finally, committee members, it's just to update you on the fact that actually the State of the Region report, in terms of the transport indicators, they are effectively a headline suite of indicators from the Transport Strategy's annual monitoring report, which, slightly confusingly, will be called the State of Transport. And our intention is to bring that to this committee later on this year, and that will include a review of our performance against the transport strategy using a wider set of indicators. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And also just thinking about reported road casualties is something coming to our executive in Bradford next week, in fact, about Vision Zero, and something we're all adopting, I think, in our respective authorities. Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come in on this because there seem to be, my understanding is that these priorities are how we measure this, these indicators are how we measure creating an accessible, clean and customer-focused transport system. And yet not one of the indicators has anything to do with how clean the transport system is. There's no emission measurements, there's no air quality, there's not anything like that, and that seemed quite a big hole in one of the key parts of that priority. And I was wondering, is that because they're going to be covered in the building a sustainable, nature-rich and carbon-neutral region, or is that because we're just too uncomfortable to look at those figures?
Yeah, I can respond to that. Yeah, so I think it's worth noting that some of the transport indicators in here, some of them are cross-cutting. Some of them relate to inclusive growth, getting people access to jobs. Some of them relate to the climate emergency in terms of mode shift and therefore carbon reductions. So yeah, I haven't provided you with the long list of the 40 indicators. However, they are publicly available on the State of the Region website, and I should mention that there's also an interactive dashboard alongside it, and there are references in there in relation to the climate emergency, but I can certainly pick up your point in terms of how we add that into the wider narrative, if that makes sense.
So if there's some wider indicators, could you send us a link to those so everybody can see those, going to Councillor McLaughlin's point? I mean, air quality is something that we're all obsessed with. I'm particularly obsessed with now in Bradford, so looking at that on a regular basis. So those figures are available. So I'm presuming they're included somewhere in these indicators.
So yeah, the last year's State of the Region report is online and public, and there is a dashboard, so you can see what the situation looked like last year with the 40 indicators that were included. This is an opportunity for you to kind of feedback and think about other ones, I guess specifically for transport, but certainly welcome your comments on the wider suite.
So can I just add, I think for those of you who've got it, got the pack electronically, there's a link in the paper, so if you click the link, it'll take you to the power dashboard that Andrew's talked about.
And do we have air quality?
I can't recall. I need to check. It might fall within one of the other themes. I can't recall offhand.
The suggestion is air quality should be included.
Air quality and emissions, frankly. I know they might not look very good until we get these new buses in a few years' time, but we should keep our eye on them because that lack of progress itself is a motivator.
So I think it'll be air quality. I think you can't differentiate emissions from different vehicles. That's the issue. So air quality is the NOx, the NO2 thing is what is measured. I think that is what you can easily get hold of. Councillor Carlin.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, that point was one I picked up on, actually. And I was thinking, obviously, we've got discussion later on around the new electric buses. Actually, your air quality might be a better way of measuring it, but I had thought of something round on the transport, the number of routes or the number of mileage that were serviced by low emissions fleet, for instance, because that's something that is a priority for us to get through all of the districts. And obviously that's working forward. The other thing I noted, just looking at the patronage figures, and it was around rail actually, but it fits into the others, that quite often what we're seeing as fewer people do work in an office every day, that actually it's sometimes those leisure routes that are becoming a larger slice of the pie in terms of transport across the city. We have got that access inequality ratio of people getting closer to jobs, but I think the Leeds Transport Strategy and some of the others across the district do reference getting access to everyone to as many opportunities as possible by public transport, and obviously jobs is a really key one, but there are other opportunities. You know, if you can't get to the hospital by public transport, if you can't get to all kinds of leisure opportunities, then that's a bit of a struggle. Now, the reason I go into that is if we end up in a position where leisure routes are so much more important on the bus or on the train in future, then now's the time to start measuring that. If it tails off that we never get the same commuter level on the buses, then we'll really want to look at how those other journeys are. I remember a figure in Leeds from a couple of years ago where if you had days out and visiting family and friends journeys together, they were actually more than the number of journeys taken to go to work. And so it's the time probably to focus on those in case we don't know, as we've alluded to previously, where everything levels out. And for people to not buy a car and to use public transport for all opportunities, then they need to be able to live their life on the bus rather than just get to work. Obviously getting to work and getting people closer to an area of employment is really important, but otherwise those that can afford to buy a car may buy one for those journeys on the weekend and similar.
So the question is, how do we measure that? So is it about time, perhaps, of travel, like weekend travel, daytime travel, nighttime travel?
Yeah, we can do that. So we can amend as Councillor Carlisle suggested, the access inequality ratio, which relates to bus versus car at the morning peak. So it's just bus, not rail, getting to key employment centres. So where there are jobs effectively, and it shows that difference in terms of accessibility. So there's no reason why we couldn't look into doing that for other things other than jobs, if that makes sense. So there's something comparable there.
Lovely. Any more comments, questions on this? No. So hopefully we've given you something there to go away with, particularly on air quality and emissions and sort of time of travel, if you like, not mode, but purpose of travel, probably. So if you could look at accommodating those, and if everybody can have a look at that Power BI link, and if there's any other questions, I'm sure Andrew, after the event, you'd be happy to take those. Lovely. I think that was it for the recommendations. We've suggested additional indicators, so we should move on now then to the next item on the agenda, which is item 10, passenger experience update report. And Dave, I think this is you.
It is, and for members who are new to the committee, have slightly retitled it as well. We periodically just bring you something, the state of the public transport network type of paper, and that's what this is, with a series of appendices in terms of both insights in terms of transport use, and also some data and graphs in terms of how certain services are being used. I don't tend to talk to the paper in detail. Happy to take any questions. Yeah.
So it's called Passenger Experience Update Report. Would Wakefield like to come in on this?
As far as bus passengers in Wakefield are concerned, in recent weeks, the report on the experience will be a very, very short one indeed. I might add that it's good that it looks as though probably the bus dispute in Wakefield is probably coming to an end. It's caused severe difficulties, not simply in terms of travel to work. It's caused difficulties in terms of people travelling for medical attention. It's caused particular difficulties for people who find taxi fares too high to pay. People cancelling dental appointments, which are like golden nuggets anyway. It also has had a very significant impact on the town centres. Certainly I got a surprise, and this is simply listening to various traders talking. I wouldn't have expected the percentage of their customers who've come by bus to have been quite as high as it was, but some of them were reporting very, very Very difficult conditions indeed. As I said earlier, it serves as a salutary reminder of just how important bus travel still is, and it's not simply a marginal service for the very old, very young, or people in between who are not working. It's very critical. I don't think I've got a great deal to say beyond that.
Thank you, Councillor Swift. Councillor Hutchinson.
Thank you. There are 3 rail services or rail routes that have had substantial reductions through Calderdale in December, and being prolonged and further reductions, particularly in the service from Halifax to Hull. I was wondering what assurances we had that progress was being made by the train operating companies on driver training and recruitment, because obviously the concern is that these reduced services will become permanent reductions.
So you're talking about the Northern Rail cutbacks there because of the driver shortage rather than the strikes, I think, aren't you, Councillor Hutchinson?
Yes,
is that right?
yes, certainly. And these are the ones that were timetable changes
absolutely.
in December
And both myself and the Mayor have had quite a few conversations with Northern Rail, pushing them to reinstate the timetable by December 2022 that they had in December 21, and they have committed to do that, haven't they, Dave?
They have, and the Mayor and Councillor Hinchcliffe, as she said, met with Northern Rail and Transpennine Express to seek reassurances in terms of the driver training, recruitment issues, resolution of some of the more local industrial relations issues, and building service back up from some of the service reductions that we've seen. And there is a concern, as Councillor Hutchinson said, that when and how the services get stepped back up, and a lot of pressure from the Mayor and from Councillor Hinchcliffe on the train operators and the Department for Transport, and through the Rail North Committee, Transport for the North, that has the link into to the management of the franchise, what used to be called franchises, the contracts that the government have with the train operators now. So lots of pressure to build the service back up, and some of which is sort of planned in, and some of which isn't yet.
So I share your concern, Councillor Hutchinson. Believe me, we will keep pushing. We've had the commitments, but we need to see that realised. And obviously the concern is, in the meantime, are people finding going back into the car rather than off the train, which obviously defeats everything we've been talking about today. Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Chair. And it was two different paragraphs, actually. One on page 56, 219, and 58, 234, both referring to COVID legacy problems, I suppose you might call them. But in the first one, on page 56, it refers to training backlogs and sickness levels remain high. And then on 58, it also refers to training backlogs for train crew availability. And when it says sickness levels remain high, does that mean sickness levels, or does it simply mean people ringing in with positive tests? And do people have to do this now? I mean, the England cricket team are not testing now, so why should train staff?
It's true.
I think it's.
COVID is on the rise as well now, Councillor Buckley. That's the other problem, I'm afraid. But anyway, carry on.
I think sickness discussions we've been having with the train operators is that COVID is a factor, but not the only factor in sickness levels that they're experiencing. So and they are impacting on service delivery. So I think it's highlighted in here, but I don't think it's simply COVID. I think there's a range of other factors as well.
Thank you, yes. So Melissa Farmer for TransPennine Express. So it's just to keep you up to date on the sickness. As Dave alluded, we have been speaking with the officers regarding sickness. Sickness is still very high levels. As Dave said, it's not all COVID at the moment. We are having other long-term sickness issues, unfortunately some of which are mental health related. As you can imagine, the last couple of years has been very stressful, particularly on some of our frontline staff, and we are seeing the impact of that. What we are doing internally and have been certainly addressing over the past few months is looking at what the other sickness, what is causing sickness levels that are not COVID, and addressing that internally in terms of the support we're offering to staff to try and get them back to work. And there's various things we're putting in place in terms of improving our occupational health support, making sure that people are assessed regularly and that management support for those staff to get people back to work is a key priority. So as I say, it's not all COVID related. We are having some increases, localised increases, but it is that mental health aspect that we're absolutely dealing with internally now to try and get our train crew back, get them back so that they're well supported, and we reflect on the past few years and what they're currently going through with industrial action, but make sure we give you that additional support internally through our various mechanisms. So
Thank you very much. Thank you. Any more questions? Councillor Clark?
Thank you, Chair. Just two items I want to sort of raise in terms of the first one in Appendix 2, regards to timetable changes. I think it's very harrowing, the sort of level of reduction of services, particularly in Bradford, on the main Airedale and Wharfdale lines, to see such a reduction in those services. And again, it doesn't seem to be an isolated trend. Again, across the whole region, services are lowering, and I think we need to try and look at that and see what can be done to be changed. And certainly on item 2.3 on the report, in regards to the strike action on rail services, I think we have to recognise the damage that strike action can do, and certainly I think the members of the committee will join me in asking the unions, who have acted quite irresponsibly in this action, to come to a settlement with the rail companies as soon as possible.
Well, obviously, it would also be good for government to really step up to the mark and to show that they care about people getting around this country. So we all care about people getting to where they need to get to, and we in this authority probably care more than most. But the government have just stood back and just let that happen, because actually we know that they wanted them to have a strike, and that is really quite distressing for us pragmatic councillors who just want people to get on with life and to enable people to get to their work and to get to their leisure facilities. It has been very difficult to see that. So I would encourage government to play their very substantial part, and to actually, everything we've been talking about today is about funding being cut by government on transport, and that is something you cannot get away from, I'm afraid. The government needs to believe in transport, because it is such an important part of economic growth, and we need to see that well supported everywhere in West Yorkshire, and we've not been well served so far by a government who doesn't seem that interested outside Westminster. So any more questions? Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Chair. On the passenger experience data, is it possible to get any of it, I don't know if I missed it, but more broken down by area? And in particular, I'm interested in how passenger experience of different forms of transport is in particular areas. So, for example, one of my constituents in my ward, who lives in Horsforth, her train service that she needed to get into work into Leeds was cut. And then she had problems with buses and getting the buses into Leeds, because first of all, the early bus that she needed was cut, and then the slightly later bus is often cancelled and so on. So if you don't have a car, you have different forms of transport open to you, and it's not you're not just committed necessarily to bus or rail. So I'm quite interested in how area by area passenger experience across those public forms of public transport, what that looks like.
And how granular can we go?
Yeah, I'd sort of refer you a little bit to the earlier paper about the Mayor's big bus chat, because I think it sort of illustrates the need in that respect about bus specifically, for a sort of level of engagement that gets into that sort of area, locality type of impacts, because some of the data collection is difficult to actually break down into locality type of implications, because to a certain extent, by definition, public transport collects people from various different places and takes them to somewhere else. So try and get a little bit better in terms of disaggregating, but sometimes you need to actually do some public engagement on top of that to do that. I think that Transport Focus is the national body that does sort of research into passenger experience as well. But their sample sizes don't tend to get down to that sort of locality level either. So, and I know that some of the councils have done their own as well. So it's probably piecing all of that together.
It obviously highlights where the issues are, particularly, doesn't it, from a network point of view? It's a good point, well made. Any other questions or comments on this? No. So I think we're noting the passenger experience report and all the data provided there. Very helpful, thank you very much. And anything else on that? I don't think there was anything. No. So moving on then to the transport policy update report. No? Oh yes, sorry, Melissa, could you take your mic off, please? Thank you. Transport policy update report, Liz.
Thank you very much, Chair. For those of you who are new to the committee, we try and bring together in one paper some of the other updates that aren't included in the substantive papers. So this is a mixture of things. I'll be brief and then happy to take questions. We try and update the committee on all things that are happening at the Transport for the North level. So Transport for the North is a statutory sub-regional body, and the Mayor sits on the board, Councillor Hinchcliffe sits on Rail North, and Amir has just left us, but Amir is going to be our new representative from the LEP, who will also sit on the TFN board. So if there are any specific questions, then hopefully between various people around the table we can answer them. Transport for the North meets as a board, and what we've tried to do here is summarise the various discussions that have happened there. There was actually one that happened yesterday, so that didn't make it into the papers, obviously. I wasn't there. I was hoping if Amir was still going to be here, he could answer any questions on what happened yesterday, but we'll include that in the next round of the papers. The paper also then goes into some of the updates around cycling and walking, which is obviously really key. We've talked about this quite a bit today, about how you access rail stations, the bus network, as well as just making those journeys by walking, cycling or wheeling, and there's some schemes in here which will come through the normal assurance framework, which we'll hear a bit later from Craig, but we wanted to give you a flavour of the things that are being funded. And we also talk a little bit about where we are on rail. For those of you that were here from the previous committee, we had a workshop at the end of the last committee meeting when we talked about the rail strategy. The team are busy working on that and hoping to bring it back to you for your further input. And then we also reference a couple of consultations. So again, for those of you who are new to the committee, we do try as an organisation to respond to government consultations where they're relevant. This includes a couple of ones we've already put in. So where the deadlines don't quite match up with committee meetings, we do try and circulate them, but they're here for the record, which is the whole industry strategic plan on rail, and also a consultation that we responded to around transport and skills, which, given what we've just been talking about, is particularly important. The live one that we have at the moment is around a consultation for the implementation of the Great British Railways. The team are working through that at the moment for a response in August. Great British Railways is a really important change in the way that rail will be governed. I'm happy to take any questions on it, but that might be something, particularly for new members, we can cover in some of the introductory material, but happy to take questions.
Lovely. Lots going on. Any comments, questions? Councillor Scullion, then Councillor Salam.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to reinforce the point that's in the report about at 2.7, the second bullet point, in terms of in our dreams and our wishes and long promised, please can we have trains from Bradford and Halifax to Manchester Airport in my lifetime.
It does get a bit like this with trains, isn't it? Because it takes such a long time for government to approve business plans. We've been waiting like 9 months for them to tell us what the terms of reference of the 100 million are. And you know, you do run out of life eventually, don't you? Really, so they need to get on with this, just so we can actually see all this happening, because there's so much to do. Sorry, Councillor Salam.
Just on the active travel fund, Liz, one of the things that we need to be careful is that I know we're putting a lot of infrastructure which is much needed, and I'm so glad that we're making a mini Hollands, you know, in the boroughs of London, which needs to be rolled out in the rest of the country. However, those that we have got in existence at this moment of time, I think some attention needs to be paid to those also, because a lot of the people are actually, I see, is because there's so much debris and so much, you know, glass in the cycle lanes, people are actually forced to travel on the roads. And then also, if we can work with Sistran or others to actually also cut back some of the overgrown hedges and the trees that are actually now sort of, because I saw one person fall off this bike because he was trying to get out of the way of the branch that is hanging down on the greenway. So I think that also needs to be kept in loop.
And that's a challenge, isn't it? Because obviously, government promotes and capital costs, but there's ongoing revenue costs and maintenance, which really haven't been factored in. We could do those factored in when we get government money for capital costs. Councillor Kaushik.
Yeah, it's not only the Sustrans, it's also the district committee and districts as well, responsible as well. So we need to put pressure on both. Yeah, in the past I'm trying to do that, but whosoever is going to take the responsibilities, we're already.
Thank you. Any more comments, questions? No. So we note that transport policy update. Thank you very much. And then we move on to the introduction to the assurance framework. Is this your beast? Is it, Craig? So obviously it's a very important functional piece of work, and we all jump through hoops to try and get through the assurance framework. So do give us a presentation.
Thank you, Chair. I'm testing the technology out today, so hopefully this will now work. There we go. Right. Just put it into. There we go. Hi, I'm Craig Taylor, Head of Portfolio Management and Appraisal. My team deals with everything with regards to assurance framework, appraisal of business cases, and is also responsible for the committee report that's next, the capital approvals report next. So because there's a lot of members on transport, new members on Transport Committee, and also because Transport Committee have never really done capital approvals before, it was only up to £3 million before, and that was very rare that happened anyway. I thought it'd be useful to just quickly run you through the assurance framework. There are a few slides here, but I will try and get through them as quickly as possible, and then open up to questions at the end or in between if people feel like that's necessary. So if I have a quick run through it. Why we got it and what for? Well, it was developed in 2015 when we got the growth deal money from government, and it was part of the requirement for the money that we got from government at the time, but also we've had many other funding programmes since then. So all of our funding programmes require us to have an assurance framework, because obviously now central government don't appraise our projects. They've given us that local responsibility to be able to do that, which we really, really appreciate being able to do that, because we can take account of much more the regional issues and problems that we've got. So we apply it to every single project that comes through, and that is not just capital infrastructure, that is also some of the revenues projects as well that come through the Combined Authority. So why do we have it? It basically gives us the necessary systems and processes to manage the funding effectively. And it also, more importantly, actually, I think, gives a proper and transparent way of reporting what we're doing, and ensures value for money, and making sure that we actually do projects that fit in with our strategic economic framework and our West Yorkshire investment strategy now. We've had it for 6 years, so 7 years now. At 6 years old, we had a complete review of it, which there's a link through to it in this presentation. We have to do an annual review of it. We do that every year. So the 2020 version is around now, and we're just about to start looking at the 2023 review. And we're all obviously very proud that the government see our assurance framework as being an exemplar assurance framework. Well, that's what they've told us anyway. That is just the contents of it. I'm not going to go through that in any detail. You can read that at your own leisure. And I think the more important ones that is probably most important to this committee is the assurance around programme and project delivery, which I'll go through. So this is the assurance process. We call it the train because we think it looks like a train with the wheels. So that's what we call it. There's 7 activities, 7 decision points. It's important to say that not every project has to go through every activity and every decision point. We have some real flexibility about the type of project and how they go through that, and I'll detail that a little bit more down in this presentation. The key things I just wanted to do on this one is that we have to have key decisions at certain points, i.e. the ones that have to be notified to the public so they know when we are making decisions, and we do that at decision point 2, which is after the SOC, which is the strategic outline case, and also at FBC, which is the final business case, which is decision point 4. And I think that's probably all I need to say on that one. As I said, this is a flexible process. We don't have to go through all the activities. We can determine that you can jump straight from decision point 2 to decision point 5, for instance, if it's a smaller project or a less complex one, or it's one that we're very much used to doing, and we often quite do that. But also, to make things quicker, we can also delegate down from the committees to managing director, and also from the combined authorities to the thematic committees and so forth as well. So we often do that. The key thing to say is that all projects have to come to the combined authority at least once in their lifetime. That is very often decision point 2, which is the strategic outline case, and it's from that point onwards that they delegate down to the committees or to the managing director. Generally, if it's a large project, it'll be the OBC that comes, outline business case, that comes down to the committee, thematic committee, and the final business case, that tends to be the managing director who gets that delegation. Previously, we used to have the investment committee, and everything used to go to the investment committee and then to the combined authority. Now that we've gone to the thematic committees, up and to date, Place have taken most of the approvals, and that's because of the review of the Transport Committee that happened over the last year. But now I think it's fair to say that 80% probably of our projects will come through this committee, because that's the majority of funding that we get for transport. The odd thing will go through Place, particularly the housing schemes that we're doing. Climate Committee now and again, but not very often. Then there's the business and skills type that our economic services colleagues deal with that go through those committees. But as I say, the majority will actually come through this committee now, I think. So that's quite a change. The assurance process itself, it's my team that do the appraisal of all the business cases that come through. We use the HM Treasury's 5-case model. Some of you may have heard of that, some of them not. And the 5 cases are the strategic, economic, commercial, financial and management dimension, and they really are looking at, as it says, the strategic dimension. What's that case for change? The economic, is that value for money? The commercial is around how things are being procured, to make sure that things are being procured correctly. The financial affordability, is it affordability? Obviously, have we got the funding there for it? And then the management is important, is that have we got the people in place and the process in place to actually deliver what we say we're going to deliver. So the PMA appraise all of the projects that come through. We do a report to something called a programme appraisal team, which is an internal officer team, group. They send a report up to our PAT meetings that we have every other week, and we further appraise them at PAT. I'm a member of PAT, as is the Director of Deliver, and most people there's a representative from most of the directorates and teams within the authority, combined authority. PAT ask any questions, and then we recommend that to the decision maker, whether or not that be MD or committee or combined authority, and PAT can also set any conditions for the further decision points. There's a lot of talk recently been around the Green Book. We used to very much look at the benefit cost ratio, and that used to be the be end and end all. Since the Green Book has been revised, and also we've tried to do this very much anyway through through our local assurance framework is that it's not all around BCR. There's other important issues now, and the Green Book very much allows us to take account of all the other 5 cases, particularly the strategic case. So a lot of the projects that we do these days, because of the way that their benefit ratios are calculated, do tend to be quite low, and therefore we do very much take account of all the different cases and take that as a balance really now, rather than just looking at the BCR, which is important for all of us, I think. And the things we can look at are how we deliver levelling up, how we get we deal with the climate change and good growth agenda, inclusive growth, etc., and how we get people to use active mode and public transport and so forth, because they don't tend to score fantastically on the BCR side of things. So the 7 stages, I will very much whip through this. Activity 1 is a strategic assessment that very much is around the strategic case rather than any of the other cases, and if that's approved, then people can continue to activity 2, which is the strategic outline case, and that is really, again, very much based on the strategic outline case, and it asks promoters to look at all of the different options that are available to get around the issue or problem that they've got, and then that comes up with a long list of options that then comes into the strategic outline case, and that's what we generally take to the combined authority for them to determine whether or not this is a good project and whether or not we should fund it and whether or not it should go further forward. So it's a really key decision point is activity 2. Then that will move into activity 3, which is the outline business case, which is looking at the long list and coming down to preferred option by, looking at the short list and coming down to a preferred option. And it's here where we're really looking at the value for money side of things, the economic case, and whether or not it's deliverable through the management case and so forth. And a key one of the OBC is that we have a draft monitoring and evaluation plan, because if we don't monitor and evaluate these projects at the end of the day, we need to prove that they have been worthwhile when they've been delivered. Activity 4 is a full business case, which is really virtually when you're ready to go on site, if it's an infrastructure scheme, and actually deliver it. So you should have everything in place, all the contractual arrangements, you've done all your procurement and so forth. We can approve that with conditions, and you'll see something called the approval to proceed to delivery. So if planning's outstanding, for instance, or there's a little bit of funding that's outstanding, we can set conditions, and they just need to be met before you can start on site and so forth. Just to make further flexibility, for the smaller schemes, we have now got a single stage business case that's called a business justification case. So that is, instead of having to do an SOC, an OBC, an FBC, and that's making it a lot easier for the smaller projects. Activity 5 is a delivery closure report. So when you've finished on site, for instance, you do a delivery closure report, and you say whether or not you've delivered the outputs and the objectives that you said you were going to measure. That's usually the director of delivery who can approve that. And then it moves on to activity 6, because a lot of infrastructure projects take a long time to agree the finances. So we have a financial closure report at the end of activity 6. And then activity 7 is when we do the evaluation. So that could be some time after the project's been completed, but it is a very important point where we do evaluate to see that whether or not the project has done what it said it was going to do, and it really brings those outcomes and impacts that we really wanted from that scheme. Throughout the process, you can do change requests that come through PAT as well. That can be additional funding, delays in timescale, or changes in scope. And again, PAT appraised that and recommended to the decision makers. And that's why when we look at the reports further on, you'll see the tolerances section. Just to note, they aren't contingencies, the tolerances. That just determines who can approve them, and if it's within the tolerances, it means generally that managing director can approve. If it's outside of the tolerances, it means that because it's such a big change, it needs to come back to committee, and members need to be aware of that change. So we need committee approval to be able to do that. Carbon impact assessment, that's an important factor that's becoming much more important as we go forward. And I think everybody hopefully will know now that we have got the carbon impact assessment tool and the toolkit that we are starting to use now. And that will become mandatory, and we will be reporting the outputs of that very much in the capital approvals report, which we've got next. We need to give people a little bit of time to be able to do that, so that'll probably start coming through in the autumn, I think, when people actually start doing that and reporting that. And just quickly, a stage 1 assessment that we need for the activity 1 and 2 is very much of a qualitative assessment rather than a quantitative, because you haven't done all the modelling, particularly if it's a transport scheme and so forth. But at OBC, FBC, that is very much a quantitative impact assessment that we need, and that's where we will be saying this reduces carbon by so much, or it increases carbon by so much, or whatever the outcome might be. I'm nearly there now. In fact, we are virtually there. And this is just basically the contents of the capital approvals report that we do. I won't go through in this any detail at all, because you'll see the committee reports and hopefully you'll have read it, which is the next item anyway. But this was just to show you all of the items that we do cover in here. And as you can see, the important ones are we do cover the climate emergency, we do include inclusive growth, equality and diversity, and risks, costs, etc. So hopefully we do cover most of the issues that members will be interested in going forward. They're just contact details. If you've got any questions, please come back to us, and there's a link to the assurance framework. If you're struggling to sleep one night, have a read of it. And any questions, please?
Lovely, thank you very much. So, would you put your microphone on?
Oh, yes, of course.
So that's an important presentation for us as we go into the next item on capital approvals. Any questions before we do to that? Councillor Scully and
Chair, I just wanted to congratulate Craig on compressing that into an extraordinarily short period of time. I feel I'm never going to get years of my life back of some of these projects that I've looked through at every stage. Just a couple of comments. One is that I really welcome that flexibility from the Treasury in terms of where projects look like they've got a low BCR under the old scheme, and actually particularly in terms of tackling the climate emergency. And so, example in Calderdale of our phase 4 of our A629 project, low BCR, but actually that's because it's about walking and cycling, which have not rated highly under the old system, so really welcome that. The other thing, really welcome the bit of flex that's being talked about in terms of systems, in terms of the levels. And so it's still not a fantastically agile and swift system. And I sometimes find myself as a committee member going through these in other committees, that the way in which it's set out, you go through all the information and then there's further information from the officers, which is sometimes confusing. But I think we also confuse the public sometimes, because at the early stage, at the outline business case stage, we're often doing consultation through your voice and other routes, and the public think X is going to happen, and we're not quite so good at keeping the public involved through the various iterations and changes of projects. So really, it's not necessarily for you, but it's a just general reflection. Given the length of time that this whole process takes, we could be better at communicating. This is just the thinking stage. This is just the idea stage. This is the costing and beginning to do stage, and this is the doing stage, really. And I don't think we're always clear about those things.
That's a good point, particularly for media, actually, because obviously we can approve something when it's only stage 1, can't we? And then people think it's going to happen, and it might not, So, Councillor Swift?
Yes, it's following Councillor Hutchinson's earlier points. Noted the part about the carbon impact assessment. Is somebody keeping a running total of these carbon impact outputs?
Liz or Craig?
Well, we've only just started using the carbon impact assessment, so we don't have that data particularly, but I think that is something we will definitely do. We will keep a running track of all those. We've got a system called PIMS, which you don't really know the name of, but that's got a feature in it where you can record all this sort of information. So yes, we will do. We will definitely record all those sort of that information. Yeah.
So the answer is yes, I think. Yeah. Anything else before we move on to capital approvals? No? So let's look at the capital spending and project approval agenda item 13. Now there was a confidential appendix to this. Which one was it again now? 6. Can people just look at appendix 6? And does anybody want to ask any questions about that? Can you let me know now?
Zero emissions bus.
It's a zero emissions bus thing. Is it in the appendix that you want to comment about that, Councillor Scullion? Okay, so just Councillor Scullion, watch your words is all I'd say when it comes to zero buses. But otherwise, we'll keep going for the moment. So, we've got Melanie, have we? You're going to be Melanie. Craig.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So, capital approvals report. We've got 5 schemes today, and as just mentioned, we have got an exempt appendix for the Zebra scheme, but that is really just a split of the funding between the operators. So, hopefully there won't be too many questions on that. So there's 5 schemes, but also in the report, it reports on 2 projects that have been approved by the managing director and the director of delivery as well, just for note for the members of the committee. We have the project managers and programme managers of each of the schemes to come to just give you a quick, brief introduction of the scheme, and then after each scheme, I think we open up to questions, don't we, for each of the scheme, and then whether or not we can make the recommendations. When we get to the Leeds City Centre Cycle Connectivity Phase 2 report, there's just one slight amendment that I'd like to be minuted, please, and that is on the approval assurance route. It says that the approval to proceed will come to Transport Committee, but that was a mistake and it should read Managing Director, if we could note that, please.
What page is that? 115?
Sorry, I don't know.
Yes. Yeah, so it's on page 115, the scheme description at the end. Decision by the Transport Committee using the delegated authority from the combined authorities sought as part of this report. So decision by the Transport Committee
No, it's actually there's a table that says assurance pathway. It's that one. Sorry. Whilst people introduce the scheme, I'll find it and I'll tell you exactly what it is at the end.
There's a lot to get through in a short period of time, so let's just make sure we keep the pace up. So who's first?
Sorry. Corridor Improvement Programme A638, so it's Caroline Coy that's doing this one for us.
Hi Chair. So I'd just like to introduce the A638 Doncaster Road scheme. It's part of the wider Corridor Improvement Programme, and the scheme will make a series of improvements to a stretch of the A638 between the junction with the A655 Black Road at Heath Common and the A61 Barnsley Road at Chantry Bridge. The aim of the scheme is to improve bus reliability, new bus lanes and bus stops, and also in addition there'll be safer facilities for walking and cycling. And within the area, it will benefit from this scheme because there's many home families and large number of children within that area, so the improvement of walking and cycling is essential. This stretch of the A638 has large amounts of traffic, which does cause a lot of delays to public transport, and it's also classed as quite a road safety risk, especially for walking and cycling in the area. So it's looking at improving those safer routes and crossing facilities. So the impact of the scheme is to include to supply infrastructure to facilitate the switch to active travel, which will assist both Wakefield and the City Region's carbon reduction target. And the scheme is to help remove barriers to accessing work and education and opportunities to improve the consistency of bus journey times within the area and to offer a lot better public transport via an alternative to the car use and ensuring that there's safer facilities for cycling and walking. The scheme presents a cost ratio of 9:1, including a very high value for money category. The total cost of the scheme is 6.794 million, but the cost to the combined authority is 6.3, and the funding recommendation sought today is 1.090. The outputs obviously to improve bus stops along the route, widening of areas to accommodate extensions of an existing bus lane to do with the junction at the A638 Heath Common, new road level pedestrian crossings to improve crossings and signals along the route, and to link up with existing cycle pathways and to improve a lot better lighting along that route as well. So the decision sought is that the A638 Doncaster Road Wakefield scheme proceeds through decision point 3, outline business case, and work commences on activity 4, full business case. The development costs of 1.090 million are approved in order to progress the scheme to decision point 4, full business case, which will take the total scheme approval to 1.650 million. The combined authority would enter into an addendum to the existing funded agreement with Wakefield Council for an expenditure of up to 1.650. So a decision today by the Transport Committee using the delegated authority from the combined authority is sought as part of this report. And all future approvals are made in accordance with the assurance pathway and approval route outlined in this report. And this will be subject to the scheme remaining with the tolerances outlined.
Lovely, thank you very much. Councillor Swift?
I would commend it for your approval, Chair.
That's a very quick contribution. I like that. Positive, quick contributions, always welcome. Okay, lovely. In that case, we have a recommendation. Can I just see all those in favour, please show? Thank you very much. That is carried. Thank you. So moving on now to the next one, which is where you were uncertain that the delegation had been correctly announced.
This is Leeds City Centre cycle connectivity. So just to cover off the amendment, it's actually page 132 of the private pack. And there's a box under phase 2 that says approval to proceed. It says decision Transport Committee. That should read Managing Director, please.
Yeah, is that all?
It's a second.
Thank you. Okay.
So it's over to Vicky.
Vicky.
Okay, thank you. So yes, this is the Leeds City Centre Cycle Connectivity Scheme, and the project has been split into 2 phases. So this is the request for the full approval for phase 1, and phase 2 will have an additional approval at the approval to proceed point, which, as Craig has mentioned, is delegated to the MD, which we expect that to come forward early in 2023. So all of the routes within the overall project are around connecting existing cycle routes within the city centre. So already there's a number of high quality segregated cycle routes both within the city centre and into the city centre, but there are some gaps in this network. So this basically is what this scheme is seeking to do, is to fill those gaps within the schemes that are already built. So phase 1 consists of Crown Point Bridge Gateway, which is Crown Point Road and Black Bull Street. There's also the Western Gateway, and that connects the existing provision from the west of the city, so around the A58 and Kirkstall Road onto Wellington Street. There's also the Dewsbury Road connector, and additionally the Ingram distributor element of the Holbeck connector, which has already been constructed, and that also forms part of phase 1 of the scheme. Phase 2 is more around the Southern Gateway, and that's Neville Street and Sovereign, which, as I say, that's programmed to start early 2023. So the final sign-off from that will go back to the Managing Director. So the scheme's creating high-quality and coherent cycle links from growth areas around the city, links to planned housing and employment areas, skills and education. And because it's joining up the network, the intention is that this encourages people to cycle instead of using their cars, with all the benefits that that brings to health, improved air quality, and reducing carbon emissions. So because this is about connecting up the network, there is quite a high uplift in cycling that's expected, so around 70% of the numbers, and based on what's seen around the city centre to date and the sort of early monitoring data from other schemes, we think this is achievable. The modelling that's been undertaken on carbon, that shows that it's equivalent to taking 351 cars off the road in Leeds per day, so contributing to our mayoral pledges and Leeds City Council pledges around tackling climate emergency. And because the routes focus on connectivity within less affluent areas of the city, so people maybe don't have access to a car, and giving better access to employment and skills and education, so it's fully aligned with our ambitions around inclusive growth. Equality impact assessment work has been undertaken. There was a slight risk of some negative impact on some groups and those issues have been worked through as part of the scheme development. The modelling work on the economic benefits is showing that there's a BCR of around 3.19, so it is classed as a high value for money scheme. Contractors are on board and they're ready to start mid-July, and it will be done on a rolling programme with these elements of phase 1 completing in July 23. So it's not without its risks, is this scheme. So the key risk really they're set out in the report, and I've just picked out the key one being around the possibility of delays. Essentially there's so much work happening within the city centre that there is the management and delivery of that. It is overseen by the Leeds City Council City Resilience Group, so they are managing that risk and programming the schemes for delivery within the overall context of the city centre. So just coming on to the costs. So the budget for the scheme is constrained, and it was capped when it came forward at outline business case stage. So the committee will have seen originally at outline business case stage a scheme that was made up of 6 routes, and this is essentially the impact of inflation and the cost on materials and fuel costs, and this is why we've brought it back to committee. So the 2 of the routes are now out of scope of the combined authority funding, although they are still within the project. So the project team are working to bring in additional funding, and they are confident that given their work to date and engaging with other funders, that those will be delivered within the overall scheme. But rather than wait until all of the additional funding has been secured, the approval today is sought on the basis that the combined authority funding funds 4 of the 6 routes, and these 4 are based on their strategic priority and the benefits that these routes will deliver. So the request today is for full approval of 3.769 million, and that would take the total approved for the scheme to date to just over 5 million.
So is the money we're approving today subject to getting that money in? Is that how it works?
It would not be subject to, it would be that the project team are currently working on bringing in that additional funding. So it's just being clear in the report that those 2 routes are outside of scope of the combined authorities funding.
This is part of the problem with increasing capital costs, isn't it, I'm afraid? Sorry, Councillor Buckley, you wanted to come in?
Chair. The officer referred to possible potential delays in the scheme, and I think that was at 564 on page 133. But the point I was going to make was the paragraph directly below that, because it reads, limited data has been provided to verify the forecast increases in cycling activity, giving rise to concern that the forecast increases in cycling resulting from this scheme may be overestimated. This could impact negatively on the economic appraisal of the scheme. And I just wondered if that paragraph is in there. It's quite a negative paragraph, isn't it? And if we're faced with potential delays, is this 565 paragraph saying that actually we thought the scheme was pretty good, but now we're really not sure, but we still want some money to complete it?
So I think obviously we've had a conversation before, haven't we, about the BCR being very economic based and not always about triple bottom lines, which is what we're all trying to aim at here. Are you aware about the paragraph he's talking about? Do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I can just respond on that point. So that the modelling data that's been done on this scheme was based on schemes that have been delivered sort of earlier, a number of years ago. So there is initial data that's coming back from schemes that have been delivered more recently that is showing that the forecasts are, although they are a challenge, are more likely to be achieved. So that's part of the conditions for the second phase 2 coming back, is that a full suite of monitoring and evaluation data is provided as part of that scheme coming back. So we will be able to track those uplifts in cycling.
Thank you. Anything else? Councillor Clark?
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to ask a question of clarification in terms of the point 5.56, the report describing the funding. Obviously, with the phase 1 initial capital cost of 3.6 million. It also makes reference to apportionment of kind of combined authority overheads of £1,000. Can I ask what's the rationale behind that overhead apportionment? Is the authority trying to prop up its revenue budget using capital gains, or is there some link with specific revenue linked to the project?
Okay, so come back on that point, and others may want to add to this as well. So we do have a 3% combined authority costs that is applied across the programme, and that's budgeted for within that programme. So the way that that is dealt with in terms of the management is that it is shown scheme by scheme as part of the approval to release that funding. So it's a standard combined authority cost that's applied.
So it is quite normal to capitalise revenue as part of a big capital project. So that's something that happens a lot. Always, in fact. You can't deliver a capital project without people to deliver it. Craig?
Yeah, just to clarify that, there's an awful lot of people who work on these type of schemes, and to make it more efficient to making sure that we get those costs back, to capitalise those costs, we have an overhead, so people don't have to do lots of time sheets and prove that they've worked on those projects and so forth. So we have a general overhead to try and cover and make it more efficient in charging the costs back to projects.
Thank you. Councillor?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just questioning, is this scheme the same one that's related to in agenda item 13, appendix 3? I'm just looking at the costs of it, that's all. It says that the cycling connectivity scheme is costing 7.26 million, and for that we're going to get 2.71 kilometres of cycle track. Does that sound about right? Because that works out at about £2,700 per metre, which seems quite a lot of money. I just wonder if this was all about infrastructure or whether it was about consultancy fees and all the rest of it. It just seems phenomenal. I mean, the reason I ask this is because, I mean, I live in Halifax, and all our main routes have got cycle lanes on them. I'm talking about commuter routes, and it consists of dotted white lines with a bit of paint, with cars parked all over them. So, I mean, you're talking about 15 quid a metre here. So compared to the Leeds scheme, it's phenomenally cheaper to build it in Coaldale than it is in Leeds. So I'm really just questioning the economics of it, really.
The topography is more difficult in Calderdale as well, as I'm sure Councillor Scullion will say, that obviously flat land is cheaper to build on than we've got a lot of hills in that there Calderdale, as we have in other parts of the region, and therefore it's harder to put cycle lanes down there, and therefore probably more expensive, I'd imagine. But would you like to come back on that?
Yeah, so it is the cycle lanes that are going in, they're in keeping with what you'll see sort of outside of this building and other parts of the city centre. So they are fully segregated, and they are one of the issues around the costs, and why we brought it back to the committee was the impact of inflation. So that has no doubt impacted on the costs. Again, just going back to what I was saying about the scheme, it's filling the gaps. So although the kilometres has decreased from where it was previously to the 2.7, it's that kind of wider benefit that you get from actually joining up all of the sort of smaller routes that are already existing, so you get that kind of bigger impact from it.
It's not that I'm sore about Leeds getting this money and we're not. It just seems a phenomenal difference in infrastructure costs. Thank you, Chair.
Everything's very expensive in transport terms. Councillor Hayden.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There is a bigger cost to building a segregated cycle lane than putting the white lines down.
Well, I understand that. I just wonder why Leeds is getting them and we don't.
Well, maybe take that up with your own authority. But
well,
this is going in. This is going in so that and you know, I'm really pleased that this is being, because you're not going to cycle into the city centre if you hit a gap where there isn't a segregated, and you've got to contend with Wellington Street Junction with the outer ring road, the inner ring road there. Sorry. So it's like the superhighway that went from that goes from Seacroft through to Bradford, and I can use that really easily until I get to the end of York Road, and then I'm faced with 4 lanes of traffic. So we need this joining up, and that's why it looks expensive per kilometre or per metre. And why you're not getting it? Well, probably the topography. But I'll leave that to somebody else.
Turn the microphones off. Thank you very much. People can speak. And Councillor Scullion, would you like to come in?
Thank you, Chair. And I can reassure Councillor Caffrey that we are actually going to get a share of the money, and through the Corridor Improvement Plan, we're actually getting cycle lanes in some of our main arterial routes. As you said, Chair, it isn't easy in Calderdale. Actually, it's going to cost rather a lot more. And because of the road narrows, in terms of share of road space, is actually very difficult for us. The old just drawing a line down the side of the road, as Councillor Caffrey says, simply hasn't worked. So we have to be a lot cleverer about routes, about the way in which we use road space. But we are getting a few bob. Maybe not as much as Leeds, but we're definitely getting a few bob for it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So
And
any more
I
questions?
won't complain.
Any more questions? No? In that case, can I see all those in favour of this scheme, please show? That is carried. Thank you very much. So now going on to the next one, Leeds Station Sustainable Travel Gateway.
Yeah, hi, it's Fiona that's doing this one for us.
Good afternoon. So this scheme, the Leeds Sustainable Travel Gateway scheme, forms part of the TCF programme, the Transforming Cities programme, and it did initially form part of a package with the previous project that we've just discussed, that seeks to improve access to Leeds rail station from areas across the city, facilitating growth in rail travel for onward travel. The scheme is the first phase of the Leeds Integrated Station Master Plan. And in 2019-2020 year, 34 million passengers use Leeds Station, and the latest forecast suggests that passenger numbers could increase by 44% by 2043, and this is taking into consideration the impact of the pandemic. The scheme aims to address some of the issues experienced by passengers accessing the station from the main entrance on New Station Street, and these include safety for pedestrians and other vulnerable users, conflict between buses, taxis and pedestrians, a taxi rank that causes issues for people with mobility impairments, and congestion at peak times and pinch points on New Station Street as it currently is, along with a lack of secure cycle parking and cycle hire facilities. The scheme essentially redesigns the front of the station, incorporating significant changes to New Station Street and Bishopgate Street. There'll be a new pedestrian plaza with wide steps down to Bishopgate Street. 2 new high-capacity lifts for people with mobility impairments and luggage and other aspects where you need to not use the steps. Relocation of the buses off New Station Street to locations nearby in the city, and this is linked to the works plan, the works ongoing on Boar Lane and also the works plan for City Square. A new, larger, sheltered and accessible taxi rank on Bishopgate Street, as well as connecting the cycle routes on Bishopgate Street, Neville Street and Dark Neville Street. And this will help to connect the South Bank along with improvements to what's known as the Dark Arches area to improve safety and security. So there'll be new lighting, cladding, CCTV, etc. On what is currently a quite dark and imposing area of the city. Plus the introduction of a 550 space cycle hub, which will include electric bike charging, accessible bikes and a commercial operating space. The scheme has undertaken ongoing and an extensive consultation and engagement with both the public and key stakeholders, including the Combined Authority on bus and customer experience, open dialogue with taxi and access groups who were initially unsupportive of the proposals, but this ongoing dialogue has helped to shape the scheme so that it is now supported by those groups. The project has been developed by Leeds City Council, but with good engagement and support and working relationships with Network Rail as asset owners and operators. And approvals are now in place from Network Rail for the majority of the detailed designs of the scheme, with just some minor aspects relating to CCTV and technical details of the cladding on Neville Street to be signed off, and they are expecting that within the next few weeks. The scheme is one of the largest in the Transforming Cities programme, with an initial indicative allocation of 32.5 million. The costs have evolved through this full business case detailed design stage, and we have seen an increase of around 2.5 million primarily as a result of inflation and also protracted timescales linked to the interface with Network Rail. Their internal processes can be quite lengthy. Despite undergoing review and value engineering exercises with the designers and the contractors that Leeds have on board for this, the costs do still come in at around £2.5 million over the indicative budget. We've worked with the team in Leeds, and the additional funding for the scheme will be found from the Transforming Cities programme risk and contingency pot. However, this is on the basis that the programme team will work with Leeds and the wider programme partners to review the wider programme over the coming months to identify where savings can be made to ensure that the programme remains affordable within the funding available. The project has the majority of the necessary approvals to proceed in place, with planning granted in late October and Leeds Executive Committee giving approval in principle to the scheme in last month. The scheme supports the mayoral pledges around the climate emergency as it aims to increase the uptake of public transport, cycling and walking for short and longer journeys. It delivers against our inclusive growth aims through helping to facilitate the regeneration of the South Bank, improving the safety and security of the areas surrounding the station, improving accessibility to the station for all users, as well as supporting wider schemes that will improve air quality across the city. The scheme is on track to start construction following the final approval to proceed in November this year. It is expected that the project will be completed by June 2024. Some early initial enabling works and a first phase to deliver the cycling connections have been previously approved and are actually currently on site. The impact of these works is being managed through obviously traffic management, but also through the introduction of a temporary bus lane to mitigate against the closures on Bishopsgate Street. The scheme appraisal has been updated for the full business case and has been summarised in the report. The scheme aligns well with the Combined Authority and our funders' objectives and is on track to meet those objectives. Whilst the BCR for the scheme isn't high, this isn't unexpected and relates to the nature of the scheme as is detailed on page 113 of the pack. So this relates again to the kind of cycling, walking, public realm schemes, not necessarily meeting those high BCRs. There is also some further work to be done to further refine the economic assessment, which will be undertaken prior to the final approval to proceed. There are obviously ongoing risks. This is a large, high-profile, complex scheme, so there's risks that need to be actively managed, including some works that Network Rail plan to undertake on what's called the Millgoyt structure, and this is essentially the structure that sits underneath New Station Street, and those works are to strengthen that structure. In fact, a replacement of the structure. And Leeds City Council have agreed with Network Rail that any delay costs associated with those works will be borne not by the project but by Network Rail, and Network Rail are obviously funding those works for their asset. So there should be minimal impact on the scheme costs, but it could cause some delay. Therefore, the recommendations are set out on page 142 of the report are to approve the full business case and for work to commence on the next stage. Approve the £36,009,872 funding for the scheme. That includes the cost increases, and note that the total funding for that scheme does include the Combined Authority costs, as we've just discussed in the previous item. And that the funding agreement is varied to take account of the funding that's approved, and then the funding of the future project approvals are made in accordance with the pathway set out in the report, so long as it remains within the tolerances set out. And also that Leeds City Council undertake work to discharge conditions set by PAT prior to the next decision point, which is the approval to proceed.
Lovely, thank you. Turn your microphone off, please. Thank you. Now, just so everybody realises the context of this, this is part of the £317 million that we got as part of the devolution deal for Transforming Cities Fund, and there's major projects in each of our 5 authorities. We've got one with similar magnitude coming up in Bradford, and I know obviously other authorities have as well, but we also committed as part of that devolution deal to fund the higher rate of all the schemes going into TCF, so that's 500 and something million. 500 and something million of, and that will come out of the 830 million that we've been hopefully funded from government, and gain share as well. So this is a long-term project where we all get major schemes out of this money, which we wouldn't have if we didn't have devolution. So let's all remember that, which is very important. So any questions, comments? Peter, Councillor Clark?
First, I think it's good that you're praising devolution. It's an excellent thing from the Conservative government to have been able to.
To be fair, it's
push
like the
through.
Labour government, but I'm very pleased to have negotiated with Simon Clark to get the best deal in the country.
But more a specific problem on this project. Just looking through the obviously the cost elements on point 5.88. Can I ask why the value for money ratio sitting at 1.3 is so low?
So it in the main relates to the fact that the majority of the benefits of this scheme are, it's a constrained scheme. It's not a corridor scheme that's going to provide huge journey time improvement benefits. It's a constrained scheme in the centre of Leeds, so the majority of the benefits are related to the public realm enhancements of that scheme, which don't generally fall well into the DFT's transport appraisal guidance that we need to follow. So that's as set out in the report. There's
It's a bit like computer says no, Councillor Clark. So the national government have a business case ratio. It's all about journey times. And if you go outside that and provide benefits like economic regeneration, they don't really get that. And that's why that for disadvantaged communities in particular, it's really hard to get things through a BCR, business case ratio, because actually national government is just not set up for thinking about wider impacts and benefits of some of these transport schemes. For them, it's all about getting to A to B, but for us, it's about modal shift. It's about making sure we reduce our carbon, which is choking us as a region, and about making sure that economic regeneration is brought about as part of this as well. So these are visionary schemes which are really going to transform our communities. Councillor Buckley, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, just briefly, Chair. I did have a briefing on this, but one thing I can't remember whether I heard it right or not. When the scheme is finished, will New Station Street be owned by Network Rail? And I just wondered whether there is provision in all these figures for security, rising bollards or something like that.
I'd have to come back with you on the specific ownership question, if that's okay. Oh, you'll just come in.
It is currently owned by Network Rail. Right now, yeah, has always been. They own from Ball Lane to where it comes out by the Queen's as well, and has always, which is why they charge the taxi drivers. And the reason that Network Rail, the reasons that they gave for wanting all traffic, all vehicles to be off New Station Street was security and health and safety. So that's their rationale for clearing all traffic off New Station Street.
Lovely, thank you, Councillor Hayden, for that clarification.
Just on the rising bollard.
Rising bollards. It's not an insult. That's just.
Again, sorry, I'm not completely au fait with the very detail, but I do know that obviously Leeds City Council have been working closely with Network Rail on the security measures and the sign off of those. So,
Councillor Hayden knows about rising bollards. Do you? Are you going to come back on that later, Councillor Hayden?
I will get that.
So Councillor Hayden can get back to Councillor Buckley on that detail. Any other questions on this scheme? Councillor Salam.
Just to say, I mean, it does say that there's a 560 spaces cycle ports electric bikes. Presuming that's charging points also. But are these, like we've got in Bradford, we've just got just like, just chiffons, you just come and put your bike. Are these secure storage type of bike parks?
yeah, so essentially, do you recall where the Shabab's restaurant used to be?
Yeah.
Essentially, it's that whole space is going to be a fully dedicated cycle hub, for secure parking, with a commercial operator running that.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? Councillor Cullen.
I was just going to come in briefly on that. So yeah, it's a fully secure cycle hub, staffed, and also I think because of request from the Combined Authority, it's going to be fully available for accessible bikes as well and have a number of places. So yeah, it's not Sheffield stands, it's a full facility where you can leave your bike in for a day again feel 100% confident of its safety, but it will have then a range of different lockable items to put any type of bike on. The one thing I was going to point out on this scheme, because it's interesting about that, it coming out like that on the cost appraisal, because what you see in this and what you referred to is the increase of travellers expected at the station. Now, I don't know whether anyone else has been in, but I've been in the station at a point where they've had to close it because there's been too many people in for health and safety. They've literally had to remove everyone from the station at that point. And this is showing a 44% increase. So when there's nearly 50 million people coming out those doors, it's going to be practically impossible to get anywhere. So it's very odd that the business case of this doesn't stack up in the fact that actually it's going to be impossible for people to leave the station if we do nothing at that particular point, as far as I've read it, Jeff.
It's why devolution is so important, because actually it's about making decisions, relevant decisions, which are local to people. And we know all these things, but obviously someone in Westminster wouldn't, would they? So it's why we're providing this local insight. Any more questions, comments? No? Can I see those all in favour of this scheme then? Please show. That is carried. Thank you very much. Moving on now to zero emission bus regional area phase 1.
That's going to be me. Those of you who've been on the committee before will probably have heard us talk to you about the Zebra. The Zebra being a zero emission bus scheme that government had. We were successful in this region at bidding into that scheme, and just to describe what that involves, really, essentially, it is covering the difference between the price of an electric bus or a zero emission bus and a standard diesel bus, and so that funding makes up the difference between the two. A bid was put to the government scheme as part of the Combined Authority's wider plan to start rolling out zero emission buses, and this is the first phase of that, and subsequent phases will look at zero emission buses in other parts of West Yorkshire, in particular Kirklees and Calderdale. But this particularly deals with the arrangements with First, Arriva and Transdev to bring 111 zero emission electric buses into West Yorkshire. And essentially what this does is it subject to lots of conditions, grant funds those operators to buy the buses, to deploy the buses in route to West Yorkshire, and to install charging equipment in the depot. So essentially what's in front of you today is a request to approve that this project proceeds to decision point 4, through decision point 4 full business case, because we had to do a business case which was, I think, shared with the committee several months ago to government to be able to get the funding in the first place, and it enables sort of progress on delivering the scheme, which is very much about entering funding agreements with the 3 respective bus operators who are sort of making up the difference in terms of buying the buses. When the project appraisal team looked at this, there were a few management requirements, particularly in terms of how we manage this arrangement, in terms of creating a project manager, but also sort of creating a wider programme board in terms of how we manage zero emission buses going forward, because in a way this is the first of what will probably be a succession of different schemes to increase the number of zero emission buses in the region, and also to have a benefits realisation plan so that we can be charting the impacts of zero emission buses. And we talked a little bit about air quality and the sort of benefits earlier in previous items. So that's what's recommended to you in 5.131.
Thank you very much. Obviously, as you say, something we've already touched on earlier in the meeting, very important for all of us. Any questions, comments, Councillor Hutchinson?
Thank you, Chair. Understanding in phase 1, you're talking about 110 odd buses for Wakefield, Bradford and Leeds. What's going to happen to the cast-offs? Are they going to be cascaded to other boroughs to replace some of the more decrepit buses that are there, or will they be redistributed within the 3 boroughs that are the key ones in phase 1?
I think separate to this, but through the Bus Alliance, we have got plans and targets with the bus operators to have all buses reaching at the very least the Euro 6 standard, which is the standard required for clean air zones. So to a certain extent, how those buses are redeployed isn't something we're very specific about. What we are specific about is we should have no net reduction in sort of compliance with the Euro 6 requirements, and we have talked in this committee before about the distribution of Euro 6 buses isn't particularly even across the across counties. So we will have discussions through the Bus Alliance about redeploying the Euro 6 buses that might be displaced by these so that we get overall benefit across the piece. But we won't necessarily be looking at a sort of vehicle by vehicle plan as to where they go to. But hopefully the really old non-Euro 6 buses sort of go out of the system as part of this.
Thank you very much. It's why those partnership meetings, which Councillor Carroll and Councillor Koshik chair, are just so important, aren't they? Because it's really important we keep talking to them to absolutely make sure that those are not recycled to some other places. Any more questions or comments on this, Councillor?
Just a quick one, Dave. I mean, it's good that we're actually now seeing most of the fleets are actually Euro 6 or above, and some of the electric buses, especially Transdev and Keighley, have actually now deployed a number of buses there, and First and Arriva are also looking at that. Are we in talk with the operators about the footprint of their depots? Because to have all electric buses, the current footprint of the depots is just not viable for the charging points and then the parking of the buses. You know, if you go in now, you know, I mean, I'm not saying I'm fat, but I can't even get through the 2 parked buses because they're parked so closely to each other, and to have them parked for the charging points. Are we having that conversation
Councillor Slam makes a very, very pertinent point actually about electric buses generally, is that how a bus depot is laid out isn't for charging buses in that form, and it actually does require more space than it is when vehicles are fuelled from a fuelling point. In this particular bid, 2 of the 3, these proposals sit within some wider depot redevelopment propositions that the bus operators have. So to a certain extent, they are a little bit contingent on doing things with depots. So we are in that sort of discussion with them, so but I think it is a valid point that it's not just about the buses and the charging equipment. How bus depots work for electric buses shouldn't be we shouldn't lose sight of that.
Of course, hydrogen as well as electric, which is another conversation with similar lines. Okay, and so Councillor McLaughlin, you want to?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Forgive me if this is an ignorant point. I'm new to the committee, so I don't know what's been discussed before. But I just wanted to question the disparity between phase 1, 111 buses for Leeds, Bradford, Wakefield. Fine, brilliant, lovely. But phase 2, 8 for Calderdale and Kirklees. I just wondered why there was such a disparity between those.
We have discussed this before.
We have, and I can give a brief explanation to that. I mean, because as you can see from the papers, the lion's share of the investment in this particular scheme, because of the way the government set this up, it comes from the bus operators who are going to buy the buses. So to a certain extent, the bids and the depots that will be based upon were sort of led by that side. We did recognise that we want to develop further in other areas. We will want to talk about any further funding that comes from a subsequent Zebra scheme where we can have a significant step up. But what we did say is that we would use some of the, and bring forward a proposal with some of the combined authorities' own funding to convert some of the buses that run on services that the combined authority directly funds in Calderdale and Kirklees, so that we at least are starting from things at that end as well. That's not the end of the story in terms of the programme. I think as set out in the paper, this is phase one, I think I said earlier, of a series of things. So what we will be doing is bringing forward a proposal for essentially the combined authority to buy those buses, and obviously that's at full cost rather than at the marginal cost that we're buying the 110, 111. So that's the reason why there's a sort of big gap in numbers here, because those would be wholly funded buses from the combined authority.
So it's the operators really who dictate where.
That doesn't stop subsequent situations where we talk to the relevant operators in Kirklees and Calderdale about bringing buses into Halifax Depot, Huddersfield Depot, or Dewsbury or Kirklees.
Enabled with electric charging points. It's a huge change in the infrastructure, isn't it, really, for across the region, and we have to be prepared to make those changes because it's of lasting benefit. Any more questions or comments on this? No, in that case, can I ask to see those people in favour please show? That is carried, thank you very much. Next then, on Active Travel Fund.
Yeah, this is the last one, so Chris is going to deal with this one.
Yeah, good afternoon everybody. Chris Moses from the Combined Authorities Active Travel team. So I'm presenting on a change request to the Active Travel Fund Tranche 3. Following emergency active travel, which was awarded in 2020, which we now know as Tranche 1, and Tranche 2 following on in 2021. In summer 2021, we put in a bid to DfT for an Active Travel Fund Tranche 3. The bid had 13 schemes at a total value of 12.3 million, and that programme went through the assurance process and has a combined authority approval for that expenditure. Since then, there was a delayed announcement from DfT, so originally due in September 21, but actually arrived with us in March 22, and we were awarded 5 of the 13 schemes with a total value of 6.9 million, so hence the change request. The impacts of the scheme, the schemes that we put forward through the ATF Tranche 3 programme vary depending on the scope, but include things like major corridor improvements such as the A660 in Leeds, active travel neighbourhoods that will deliver segregated cycle lanes, local road closures, just enabling people to make more journeys on foot and by bike. School streets, so there's a range of school streets across West Yorkshire districts, encouraging people to cycle and walk to school, and often they include a park and stride site, so we appreciate that we're displacing parking on streets adjacent to schools, so there's generally similar to a kind of park and ride, alternative parking, and people can then walk from there, walk, cycle, scoot to school. All of the schemes in the programme aim to reduce journeys by car, increase levels of active travel, cycling, walking, scooting, skipping, dancing, whatever, and enable safer and more convenient journeys by foot and by bike and other active travel methods. The total programme cost, as I said, is 6.9 million, and that covers schemes across all West Yorkshire local authority areas. And the decision that's sought today is to reflect that the award is to deliver 5 rather than 13 schemes. The reduced budget from 12.3 to 6.9
and that the timescale has changed because of the delayed announcement from DFT. So the original approval had funds to be committed by March 22 and delivery by 2023, and we're now looking to have funds committed by March 23 and delivery by March 24. And the line in the DFT award that covers that is that funding must, wherever be possible, be committed by the end of the 22-23 financial year. So we're slotting in with that. DFT don't propose delivery dates as such. They just request that schemes are delivered as soon as reasonably possible. But the Combined Authority want to put the March 24 deadline on there just to avoid any unnecessary slippage. And all of that detail is in the change request that's in the papers.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So very important schemes here in many of our authorities. Any questions, comments? No? Okay. Well, in that case, can I just ask all those in favour, please show? That is carried. Thank you very much. I believe, is that at the end of the agenda now? Is there anything else? Excellent. Well, can I thank you all for your patience this morning? Can you just stay behind after school, I'm afraid, because there's a 5 minutes briefing from Dave on buses. Can I ask public to leave now, please, if that's okay? Thank you very much, and just wait for you to clear.